everyone. Hello, hello, hello. If y'all could please make sure to let us know that you can see and hear us so that I don't start like jumping into important bits and then end up no one can hear me. That would be great.
That would be pretty good, but I think I can confirm from this side you are sounding loud, clear, and just as beautiful as normal.
Oh, great. How wonderful for me and everyone else. Yeah. Good. Okay, good. All right. So, hopefully you all are having a wonderful weekend, and for those in the States or that celebrate on the same day as us, a wonderful Mother's Day for those celebrating it today.
Oh, Mother's Day.
Yeah, but luckily I celebrated it yesterday with my family, so I am off the hook for the morning. But yeah, we hope you're taking care of yourselves out there and have been enjoying everything just going on in the midst of other things. I forgot to mute my phone, so I'm gonna do that real quick. But
and while he's doing that, I'd just like to say that over here in the afternoon, where all good correct time is kept, it's altogether too hot in Scotland. It's just really very uncomfortably warm here. I've got a skein of sweat over my forehead, and I'm actually thinking of taking my good old Mass Effect hoodie off because I'm really feeling it at this end.
He's taking it off.
Yeah, I am taking it off because I'm just feeling a touch on the uncomfortable side. So if halfway through this stream, it looks a little bit like I have perhaps transformed into a great unclean one, and I'm slowly wilting into this slightly fatty, bubbly mess in my chair, you'll know that you don't need to worry. It's just the typical behavior of a Scotsman when he encounters anything over the temperature of normal. And by normal, I mean pretty chilly, because I'm Scottish. So that being the case, do be aware, I may just go...
We need to turn your house into like a refrigerator unit.
Well, when I'm finally allowed into my new office, it's going to have actual air conditioning in it. So,
that's super exciting.
Yeah, which is super exciting. I need it actually because I went in there yesterday, and yesterday was even hotter than today, and the sun was baking down on top of the garage. And I went in to basically go, I'm going to transport in my new bit for my PC. Went in, and the heat hit me like a wave, and I was like, no! I came out of there desiccated like a mummy tomb priest going, ah! It was absolutely awful. So yeah, I'm going to need that air conditioning.
Well, we've got a lot of good, fun things to discuss today. I don't think we've actually managed to touch on Nurgle yet much in Lorebeards, if memory serves.
No, not really. I mean, the good old Father Nurgle side of the whole story of Warhammer has been, at least from the Lorebeard side of things, not really discussed in any depth. So I'm quite looking forward to that. We've obviously alighted on Tamurkhan a little bit, and we've had a slight discussion here or there about the various options that have come in from that. But particularly when we're looking over, say, for example, in our React streams and things like that. But when it actually comes to Nurgle as a whole, no, not normally. I'll also say that I'm catching some feedback from your headphones there. Sotek, just so you know.
Then I'm going to sit back a bit. I'm going to move this more like over here.
It's a tiny amount, but just be aware that it is there.
There, that should be better.
Just like to bring that one up. Andy's wife is a great woman to stay married to a tomb prince. You know what? You're right. She is just the best. And I do sometimes feel a little bit like one of the good old mummy tomb kings. After all, I pretty much catch every single disease that passes through Edinburgh. I'll catch it and then catch it again. I've been immunocompromised for altogether too long now. It sucks.
The curse of Andy, they call it.
Yeah, the curse of Andy. Yeah, totally. So I'm very much looking forward to this, particularly because the Tamurkhan setup, what brought Tamurkhan around in the first place, is, for me, an entirely fascinating situation, which several of you out there may not know. We've kind of alighted on it before when we've said Tamurkhan was the setup to something bigger, but that setup just never happened. So even discussing that, I think, is going to be super fun.
Yeah, but first we're going to start with the early super chat stuff that came in, and then we're just going to hop right into it, which I think we will start with kind of the meta information relating to Tamurkhan, because it is genuinely and really interesting, and for many people, depressing story. But
it is.
What a perfect way to talk about Nurgle, to start with a despairing real life tale.
I mean, It gets you right in my wizened black heart.
So, Hammond, you're late. No, we were exactly on time as far as I'm concerned, and that will never change. See, before him, we all know Tamurkhan wouldn't be the worm he is today without his beloved mother, Grandma Slon. But does he celebrate Mother's Day on the 4th Sunday of Lent or the 2nd Sunday in May? You know what? When you're a horrible maggot creature and your mother is an even more horrible toad creature, you probably do both just to be safe. You double up. Hammond, they said my brother wouldn't be able to walk one day, but Tarma can't.
OMG, Hammond.
Has Andy seen the Tamurkhan death animation in Total War Warhammer 3?
I don't know if I've seen the death one. I've seen several of Tamurkhan's animations, but I don't think I've seen the death one. Is it good?
It is. If anybody has a link to a very, very brief clip version of it, we can look at it, or the image, because it's like he basically rips his body open so that the maggot can escape. So the maggot like explodes out of his body.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which it was clever for them because it's the only way they could actually show the maggot off in game. One guy, was Tamurkhan raised in the gallows tree? The great unclean one there seemed a bit maternal towards him. Maybe. Hard to say. We will get into kind of Tamurkhan's background here in just a little bit, but that's not an impossibility. That being said, great unclean ones are kind of notoriously
maternal.
Figures. Like, they have lots of nurglings they keep around them and other demons, and they are quite literally I don't know if loci would be the right word, but like they're embodiments of that life and create a lot of life around them.
Actually, on that, before we dive into this one deeply, I'm going to bring up something that was a point of some consternation between me and a writer. I won't say which one. Where I had received a host of nurgly bits and bobs. And I was in the position where I was producing and I could look at it and say, yes, this is not acceptable for one reason, this isn't acceptable for another. And in this case, they had made the mistake of saying that all great unclean ones were men. And that was weird. Because first, they're greater demons. They don't really strictly abide by the standard definition of gender or sex or indeed anything else because they're freaking demons. But beyond that, the very nature of demons, with some of them perhaps expressing one way or another and saying that they could only express one way, was, for me, particularly when you deal with an entity like Nurgle, which really does express itself in so many different ways according to the different parts of the lore you draw from. It was weird. So I sent back a quick note saying, effectively, and explained why and explained what should be done instead, and got a reply back saying, I don't understand, but all the models are male. And I said, take a look at them. Just take a look at them and take your filters off. And I got an email back literally 5 minutes later going, my entire life has been turned upside down. I had never even considered that it could be anything other than what I had written. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And off we went to rewrite certain sections again. And as it turned out, in that particular section, it was moved to, broadly speaking, gender neutral language because that just worked better. It suited the whole concepts of demons. It suited the whole concept of the setup that we were working through better. But it's always worth remembering, just as we've mentioned multiple times in the past, whether it's for the Total War game or indeed for the miniatures, they are constrained by what they can do with their production costs attached. So you tend to find that certain miniatures never get created because it's tough to make them and also make the ones that they're definitely going to sell. And the same goes for the various models you get inside the Total War game, where they just generally make a model or two, twist it with a couple of extra bits with the skin, and away you go, because it's cheaper. Always consider the greater depth of the lore if you are ever trying to build it yourself.
Yeah, don't fall into the trap of being like, oh, well, there's only this many, so therefore this is the only thing that exists. That's not how it works. It's not how it works. So we could start very briefly, because everyone's requesting it so much, with this
with
here.
Yawning black space ahead of us.
Yeah, here we go. So we'll start with this real quick, and then we'll go into the actual regular thing. But this is Tamurkhan's
I'm looking forward to this, actually.
Death animation. So here he goes.
Oh!
And then there's even a slow-mo.
Oh, yeah!
And then there's just him, like, pile driving some dwarfs.
Laying crap into everyone around him. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So that is, so yeah,
nice.
his worm does actually show up in game, which surprised a lot of people. But I'm really glad the Total War team was able to squeeze it in there, because, like, ugh.
Yeah, that deeply pleases me because that looked pretty damn cool.
Yep. And then Awesome on Source, thank you for that. We got it. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Biofoot. Okay, actual question. How does Tamurkhan scream if he's a maggot? The mouth of Tamurkhan is the mouth of the maggot. Scream, you need lungs. And you know what maggots don't bleed and have? Lungs. A number of things, sure, but mainly lungs. Well,
right, so
what we're about to get into is that Tamurkhan's not a maggot. He's more like the closest thing that you could compare him to is a maggot.
Yeah,
would probably be the best way to put it.
He's not a maggot. He has maggot-like qualities. And it's also fair to say that if you're attempting to try and describe the physiology of a creature like that, I would suggest you're perhaps going to be mistaken if you're just going to take just a standard maggot and run with that. Also, if we're not running any video Sotek, it might be worth changing your settings so you get rid of the hiss in the background.
Oh,
if you know that,
yes,
the quiet one.
Yep. I can do that. There we go.
Wow, you're so much louder. Bosh! Just like that.
Oh, good. That means I can move my mic further away from me. Okay. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's your...
so much clearer. That's brilliant.
Very smart. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the last couple of super chats we need to get caught up on, and then let's hop right into it. So let's see. Hammond, North Americans. Oh, hey, fancy new car. Cool. Europeans. Oh, hey, fancy new AC. Cool. That one's actually a little funny.
It's kind of true.
Sparrowhawk. Finished reading all the Go Trek novels, waiting for the next one to drop. Also, I've been subscribed to you since the first Total War game. Oh, well, thank you so much. That is a long time ago now.
That is a proper beardy position to be in. A Sotek fan from the very beginnings of time.
Yeah, that's long.
When all we had was mist around us, and we didn't even have beards ourselves.
Swartions. Yes, Tamurkhan has risen indeed. He's even got his own Lorebeards now. Watchdog 3079. Good sir Sotek, who do you think is the most unique of the chieftains of Tamurkhan? So the expanded chieftains that they've added, I mean, Kazakh or Kask as they call him in the game.
They call him Kask. Interesting.
Yeah, they pronounce it as Kask in game, and I refuse to because I don't think that's how it would be pronounced. But that's because I'm stubborn.
Kask.
I would say that he definitely stands out as the most unique, just because he has the most development. But when it comes to like what each of them do and the little stories that CA kind of threw behind them, I think I actually kind of like Mournhowl the most, because they really run with the idea of like taking Skinwolf Werekins and making it where they have like a very strong pact mentality of they have that very strong familial relations. So Mournhowl's whole point is that he is kind of fallen to Tamurkhan's side and becoming this despairing entity because he's like pretty much the only survivor of his pack of Werekin, because most of them got slaughtered by a really big jabberslite that developed a hankering for wolf flesh or mutated wolf flesh, which is really unfortunate. But there's something really fascinating there, and I also really like when Nurgle plays on the despair of like family units, because I think that's something where Nurgle is really, really strong in. But I mean, the whole thing is really fun. Like, Ketzak is also super hilarious. I love him as a character, the Famir Balefiend you get, even though he's such an over the top Dune reference that I can't take him as seriously as I would like to, because he's Ketzak Fimdarak, and he's the Fimdarak who's going to like bring about a new golden age for the Famir. And yet, like, they very directly are just one-for-oneing quotes from the movie on his abilities and stuff, which is funny. But yeah, you know, he's an interesting character, and I do love my Famir, but there's that whole thing. So probably one of those two. Though Kask is fine, I'll say Kask is by far the best developed. Let's see. Laughing God, remember to like the stream. Yes, please. We would really appreciate that if you do.
Just generally speaking, make sure you do. Don't just think potentially I might. We are currently streaming, obviously, over on Loremaster of Sotek's channels. We swap between these channels here and over onto Lawhammer. And whichever channel we're on, please just click like and subscribe. It's a tiny thing, but it makes an enormous difference to us.
Inquisitor Thomas, who would win, Tamurkhan or Emperor Leto II? The Worm Emperor of Dune. Well, yeah, one's a god emperor, and one's just, a chaos champion who unfortunately didn't succeed. So,
yeah, as we're going to cover, Tamurkhan, for all that it is an extraordinarily interesting story and a really cool character, he is ultimately a chaos champion who rose and fell. Absolutely did not succeed. So in this particular case, for those of you who've read the Dune books, you'll be fully aware of just how ridiculous Leto is. The chance of Tamurkhan even intruding on his golden path would be next to zero.
Yeah. Let's see. Hope you both are well. Always enjoy watching Lorebeards. The Nurgle realm shows an area called the Lair of the Maggot Lord. Could it be tied to Tamurkhan? So originally, when it was designed, the Lair of the Maggot Lord, the earliest I remember seeing it really like put to page was probably the Realms of Chaos map that somebody drew up for, I want to say that was 8th edition.
Was it 8th? Was it that late?
It was either 7th or 8th, but I can't remember which one. But that map is the first time it gets brought up because somebody just basically designed the kind of like the battlefields of the 4 great powers and their little areas of the Realm of Chaos, and did a really cool job just filling the map with all sorts of crazy little tidbits. That was well before Tamurkhan got designed. Yeah. So I would say originally, absolutely not. But now that Tamurkhan is a thing, there could be something there. It would probably be more likely, I would guess, because it's the Realm of Chaos, that the Maggot Lord is probably a demonic entity, or either like a notable creature of Nurgle. Could be a demon prince, could be just like a really powerful great unclean one. Who knows? But I doubt it has anything actually to do with Tamurkhan, really.
Yeah, Peter, I'm sadly going to agree there, because to actually get marked in the Realm of Chaos means that it is a significant entity in the Realm of Chaos. Tamurkhan is not that. Tamurkhan is a very different type of entity, a very powerful entity in and of its own right, certainly one that was set up to be something of potential big importance, but certainly not something that would have sections of the Realm of Chaos dedicated to it. As much as that would be fun, and as much as that particular name would tie through, I think it's also fair to say that the general Nurgle parlance, as in the number of words that are used in and around Nurgle entities, is relatively limited, and there's a certain lack of imagination from some writers at certain points. In this case, it is almost certainly just a similar sounding name, and it probably is some sort of greater demon prince or great unclean one.
Yeah, because the maggots are not exactly like a rare manifestation of Nurgle's powers.
Yeah, it would be a little bit like if you moved into the great hunting grounds of Ulrich and you found yourself an area that was called the Lair of the Wolf. You wouldn't then immediately say, oh, well, I reckon that means it's definitely our Ulrich's place, our Ulrich being the head of the cult of Ulrich in Middenheim, because it's got the wolf, and he's like, the manifestation of the wolf, isn't it? It's like, no, wolves are just Ulrich's thing. And similarly here, maggots are just Nurgle's thing.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if there have been several Chaos Champions throughout the millennia who go by the epithet of the Maggot Lord. That's probably, if anything, I could imagine there have been meetings where Tamurkhan's chieftains is like, for your legacy, shouldn't maybe we come up with something a little more original that hasn't been done before?
I'll do that after I've taken, the Empire. Yeah, that's not.
Yeah. Awesome Line Taurus, as a High Elf and Dark Elf fan, though I love all Warhammer Fantasy factions, did Tamurkhan have any interactions with either of those? Not in his particular journey that we're going to get into, but one of the notes about Tamurkhan is that he is potentially very, very old. But we'll get into that in just a minute. In which case, maybe, likely, Michael Thomas, Milady, Nurgle Fedora tips. poor, poor Nurgle getting wrapped up with the Milady folk. Granted, I don't, I wouldn't put it past Nurgle to have that sort of dynamic with, just reality itself. When you have those memes of Nurgle doing the Milady stuff as opposed to it just being a woman, it would be more like reality itself going, get away from me. Because Nurgle, he just loves you so much. He just wants to be with you. Jonathan Scott, not rising like you used to. If you have rising dysfunction, ask your doctor about Tamurkhan. Tamurkhan is the number one Nurgle approved R2 prescription.
Oh, Jonathan.
So don't let. Oh no, there's a part 2.
There's more.
Don't let life keep you down. Rise up today with Tamurkhan. Warning: if you rise for 4 hours, you may be experiencing a medical emergency.
My feed was strangely filled with memes of spiders that give you erections for 4 hours today. I have no idea why, but apparently the internet decided that's what I wanted to see, with various people saying, we're going to have to give it a go. It was very daft.
We're starting off today interesting.
Yeah.
In Nurgle culture, Maggot Lord is equal to Steve.
Bob.
Yeah, essentially. All right, and then last one before we get into it, really, Sparrowhawk, thank you again. Who would win, Nurglings or Skaven slaves? Nurglings would dominate that fight.
Oh yeah,
they don't look like much, and that's kind of the eternal joke, right? Is that they look so harmless and small, but they're literally just manifestations of like the worst kinds of diseases. And just because they're giggling little squirts, everyone's like, oh, well, clearly they shouldn't be that dangerous. No, they're horrifically dangerous.
Yeah, sure, you could stand on them and they would pop like an overripe pustule upon your flesh, but nevertheless, they are little balls of menace and teeth and arguably, much more importantly, infection and disease. It would not be good. No.
Yeah, like one Nurgling showing up in a populated area is a recipe for absolute disaster. Okay, and I lied. I'm going to grab these bit things too, just because I'll forget about them if I don't. Lothar Bubonicus, the original Maggot Lord.
Totally was the original Maggot Lord. I remember painting the model for Lothar Bubonicus a bajillion years ago in his Palanquin and Nurgle. And that was just the freaking best. I loved it at the time when he's sitting there with his little crooked staff, but effectively he was just an example that was used for showing how the Chaos Warband rules could work and showing how they moved through a campaign towards hopefully demonhood. You could argue that the seeds of what would become Tamurkhan were laid all the way back down, all the way back in the original Lost in the Dam book. Lost in the Dam, was it Lost in the Dam to the other one? I always forget the two. Slaves to Darkness, Lost in the Damned.
Yeah,
pretty sure it's Lost in the Dam. Nurgle
pretty
and
sure it's Lost in the Dam.
Yeah, you're making me doubt myself. Nurgle and Tzeentch together, and it was just the best.
The one guy, having issues with rising is common among Chaos Lords over level 40. Very common. Y'all are relentless today.
Rise of Tamurkhan.
All right, the rest of these are going to wait till later. So, Tamurkhan, for those unaware who are like, okay, I have read lots of Black Library looks. I have wandered around the lore. I have never seen a mention of this Tamurkhan guy. Who the hell are they talking about? He comes from this book.
Look at that book.
Tamurkhan, the Throne of Chaos, which is undeniably the most beautiful Warhammer Fantasy book that was ever made. I don't think it can be argued. The quality of it is like literally second to none. And it's massive. It's hundreds of pages. It's a very, very long read. The artwork is all completely unique and gorgeous and dark. It's got maps and stories and scenarios and new rules and new models. And it was one of the best events that we got in the later days. And really, I mean, the later days of Warhammer Fantasy.
Yeah, it was for me. I remember this clearly when it came out, and it was somewhat of a shock. I mean, not a big shock because it had been building. But Forge World approached Warhammer in the same way they had been approaching 40k previously with their big like armory books and similar. And they decided to create this big tome that didn't just add something new to Warhammer, which would have been a very easy thing to do. What it did was it dived in deep, really deep, into a part of the Warhammer world that had been previously kind of sidelined. It had been kind of pushed right to the very edge, and they didn't really want to discuss it because it was part of that area of Games Workshop's Warhammer lore that they weren't really sure what to do. So Forge World picked it up and said, hey, Chaos Dwarves, hey, Nurgle, and hey, the Empire, and had a good look at it and went, you know what? We can do something well with this. And they attacked it with the same gusto that they had attacked their previous 40k books. And they created a thing of absolute beauty. It came out around about 2011, as I recall, if I'm running by my memory here. And when the book arrived on the scene, I remember when I first saw it, I was like, oh my fucking gods. It was so starkly in contrast to the books that had been coming out of the studio at the time, which generally fell into two loose categories. On one side, you had the army lists, of which they did a special edition for some of the later army lists, which are kind of pretty, but they were thin, really thin, small books by comparison to this tome. It was an actual, honest to goodness tome. And the writing inside it was lovingly discussing the Warhammer world in a way that no other book from the studio was. The studio books were very much focusing on the High Elves, the Empire, the Orcs and the Goblins, the big factions, and they weren't really going into depth at anything. It was a one-page spread for each one of the bestiary entries that they had. So, we are the Dragon Princes of Calador. Well, in fact, that just became the Calador Knights and all the rest of it in the book. They didn't even get a whole page to themselves. We are the whatever that one page was going to cover. They wrote something which said, this is the best this unit has ever been ever. They destroy everything. They are the best. They've been around forever. The best, by the way. They kill everything. The best. Here's their stats. And it just felt almost like, come the midpoint of Warhammer 8, that there wasn't that much new coming. It was nothing more than a reiteration of what we'd had with 7th all the way back to approximately 4th edition.
Yeah,
and
but like chucking some new units in here and there.
Yeah, and the army list best bit was when they did something new. And that was it. So, for example, the Empire Army list came out and we got ourselves a big, huge new war machine. You're like, yay, new war machine. Take a look at that ridiculous Luminarch of Heish. This is awesome. But they didn't really do anything other than add a unit, add a single model. That was about it. The art was kind of great, but it was still drawing upon some of the 6th and 7th stuff. And there wasn't anything that really just made you go, holy shit, Warhammer's doing something. So they tried, they'd done some summer campaigns, but even those books weren't that great. You had some books that were coming out for 8th that were attempting to add campaigns or working on riffing ideas in White Dwarf, but again, weren't doing much. Then this book came, and I would almost argue it was the most exciting release that 8th edition had, because it was different, because it was doing something really new, but not just that, it was doing it with love and depth. Clearly, the writers in this case, I think it was Alan Bly?
Yeah, Alan. Yep.
Alan Bly, and Rick Priestley helped with the main story. So chatting away on that one. And the whole thing was filled with characterful details.
What a writer page. It's beautiful.
Cool. Just Alan Bly, there he is.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. Rest in peace, Alan Bly. Sorry, quite. And it was just beautiful. And I remember the first time I opened up, and I was like, they're doing this. And I'll admit, I thought something quite different to everyone else at the time. My first thought when I read it was, I can't imagine everyone in the studio is going to be happy with this. Because it felt better.
Yeah, I was going to say, because Forge World walked up and went, we're way better at this than y'all are.
Yeah, they came in and they said, we don't have the same constraints you do, because the army list that we're about to create and put in here doesn't need to work for tournaments, doesn't need to work for anything other than the scenarios that we're building in here. So we can create things that are proper impressive. Boy, did they. Tamurkhan on that freaking toad dragon kicked The Toad Dragon stats were ridiculous. When you then went back to your standard Warhammer stats, and let's hark back to one of our own streams with Galrauch, or Galrauch if you must, with good old Galrauch, his stats in comparison to a Toad Dragon were almost childish, pathetic, really weak by comparison, and that in no way made sense. But the stats for the Toad Dragon did. And it made me, at the time, reassess Warhammer. I looked at it and went, you know what I miss? I miss when you had options in Warhammer and characters had levels and you could do different things with everything. This is a clear example of what Warhammer sort of was. And yes, it's a very fixed story. They've created some very fixed characters, but it's got so much more detail and fun all wrapped up into it. And it's not all focused towards just simply selling the next army list. And it was beautiful, but it wasn't just the book. They then went and created some of the most beautiful miniatures to also accompany it. And I remember seeing the first of those coming out. I ordered them, and at that point, I was quite on the periphery of Warhammer. Now, I don't mean I wasn't paying attention to it. I bought every book, and I still read them all, obviously. But I wasn't buying the miniatures. They were things that were there. I wasn't playing the game at all come around about 2011. I was mostly role-playing. But when I saw them, I was like, yeah, Elspeth, she's coming right into my house now. And I made an absolutely gorgeous little base for it. Built that up, absolutely loved it.
You make a joke on that wording, but I'm going to be the bigger man and not.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Although, hey, kind of deserve it. And I just really enjoyed what it was offering. And that is why when Warhammer then very swiftly moved from that to blowing up, I was not just surprised, I was concerned. And this is why I was concerned. Hey, we're the studio. We're making Warhammer 8. Warhammer 8's brilliant. Brilliant. Hey, we're Forge World. We're making this book. It's the first of a multi-part series. This is not just a book that stands alone and is beautiful. It's the first of a multi-part series. And the studio says, yeah, we're blowing the Warhammer world up. And you're just left going, they weren't talking to each other.
Yep. So for anyone that may be sitting there and going, oh, well, maybe that's just like rumors about it. No. So there's a page right at the back here called The Authors Afterward, where Alan writes a note to fans. And you were correct. This was 2011. Where he quite literally says, Tamurkhan, the Throne of Chaos, is the first and what will be an ongoing series of books produced by Warhammer Forge, just the same way that our popular Imperial Armor books have been produced for Forge World. And he writes a beautiful speech about how excited he is to expand the Warhammer world. And it's genuinely a wonderful series of paragraphs that just showed how excited Alan was to completely change Warhammer Fantasy forever, which he already did.
Yeah.
And then it got shot in the chest.
Yeah. And I remember being, if anything, all the more doubly surprised at what was coming with the end times as I saw it slowly unfold, given that Tamurkhan had just relatively recently come out. And I'd read Tamurkhan end to end, and I'd read that conclusion, and I was super excited for what's going to come next. I have not read a book and been more excited for something that Warhammer was going to offer ever since then, because it was such an exciting moment. It felt like they were going to do something with Warhammer. They were going to go beyond the standard army list model and examine new places and really bring them to life. And they were going to do it at a relatively swift pace, one every other year or so. That was just, wow, we're going to go through at least 4 books, one presumes, one for each one of the Chaos Powers, and they're going to go places that Warhammer hasn't. And the proof of that was in the Chaos Dwarf extras that they added, because they completely went to town on the Chaos Dwarfs. And I do mean completely went to town. They reimagined them from the ground up, redid every piece of art, literally reimagined the entire species and presented it. And the idea of them doing that to something else in the Warhammer world beyond excited me, because that means we're probably going to get 3 more entirely unique armies being added to Warhammer. And that, I don't know about you, but me on this side, that was beyond exciting.
Oh yeah, don't worry, I have a whole speech I'm about to give in a minute.
Yeah, so that sadly then moves towards the end times. and as we're looking at the meta outside of it part, we had this gorgeous, beautiful book which presented so much cool stuff. We got a bunch of models from it that were and still are gorgeous, and then they vanished, the book vanished, Warhammer vanished, and we were left with an incomplete series and just this one piece of beauty that we could look at and say, well, you know, let's now collapse to despair, for Nurgle has come and swallowed all of our dreams. And as Sotek said right at the very beginning, it could not have been more fitting than Nurgle being the one that both came first, giving us all this hope for what was to come, followed by the despair of the end times hitting and the realization we were never going to get these extra books from Forge World. And that was the end of the project. And the tears that, at least in my case, were metaphorically shed, because, hey, I wasn't that invested that I was going to weep over the lack of these books. But nevertheless, inside, my heart was breaking because it was going to be awesome. They were going to do something truly great with it. And it never came to pass.
Yeah, so some little bits that I want to add on as well is that for a lot of people, there's always the eternal discussion about like, oh, was the end times necessary? Was it, did it need to happen? Why did it happen? And there's a lot of myths and rumors and dialogue about it. And one of the things that a lot of the people who I think tend to come from outside the fantasy community, you know, they were like 40K fans or 30K fans or are just getting into Warhammer in more recent years and stuff, look at it and go, oh, well, Warhammer fantasy had kind of stagnated and it wasn't selling as well. So they did the right thing by blowing up the universe and making something completely different that, although I've come to love AOS as its own separate thing, was, if you look at first edition, very deliberately designed to 40K-ify the fantasy concept of the very first race that was released for it were literally a fantasy equivalent of Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines, with the new Khorne models and the new Stormcast Eternals. And thankfully, they have since developed into new ideas that are much fresher and are way better than what they were designed to emulate, which is honestly really funny in retrospect, but that's neither here nor there. But what a lot of people miss is that Warhammer Fantasy had started going through a renaissance, literally about 3/4 of the way through 8th edition, which is really hard to notice if you weren't living through it or paying close attention, because 3 books came out that completely changed everything. I want to say I think the first was the Storm of Magic book, which was released
book, which had this little spinner in it that I still love.
Yeah, super goofy. Which was
I loved it.
That was released by GW proper, but it opened the door in a weird way where they released this book that was essentially just a monster manual that introduced lots and lots of creatures and monsters, and it introduced a new gameplay mode that for people that preferred casual play was extremely crazy, where it had different levels of play, where it was just, oh, if you want, you can do it. Especially if you were as young as I was, for us, it was like, oh, this is wild, doesn't make any sense, but it's cool. But for older players, it was basically bringing back concepts from like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition, where you were able to bring creatures and monsters that were usually considered locked to one roster as a part of your roster, which you could do way back in the day, where there were just kind of like a general list of monsters that you could take on
edition in particular. 3rd and 4th edition particularly had that.
Yeah. So it brought that back, and it also brought back a lot of really exciting creatures that we had. For those of us that had started playing, like I started playing Warhammer back in like 2001. So I had never, and I was very little.
Baby.
Oh yeah, I was a whopping like 10 years old. So I was
2001. By that point, I'd already been working for and resigned from Games Workshop twice.
Yeah, I was a wee little 5th grader at my local mall, but there was a whole thing of like all these exciting new creatures where it's like, oh, there was a cockatrice all of a sudden, and it had like they had models for a lot of these new units. They also released a bunch of wizard models, and they brought back some models that have stayed pretty well famous to today, like the modern Black Dragon model came from the Storm of Chaos. And the Chaos Lord on Manticore also came from this time period. And so they released a bunch of minis, which was super.
That one.
Yeah, but they released a bunch of minis. The Chimera model got released, the Cockatrice model, a bunch of the wizard characters on foot, and the models all looked pretty decent. And lots of bizarre creatures showed up that just didn't get minis, so you were able to just kind of make your own stuff. Like the Zotes came back, which was probably a very big surprise for a lot of people to see them just pop out of nowhere. Yeah, the Famir returned, and basically they just brought back everything that had ever kind of vaguely had models, and it was super interesting. And then Forge World turned around and went, and in their first experiment, I think got to make Tamurkhan, which is wild. Like this book is insane. And like from a lore standpoint, it shakes up so much, where like one of the criticisms of a lot of fantasy lore is that, oh, it's so focused on like just the old world. Like it's just the Empire or it's just the High Elves and really nobody else matters. And like the second you open this book, this is what you see in the cover. The Empire is barely on this map. Like it's way over here, squished in the corner. The vast majority of the story takes place over here. Yep. Like this book focused primarily on the Ogre Kingdoms and the Darklands, with the Empire, and frankly, the Empire as a faction kind of only being the finale act, Act 3. The vast majority of the story was Alan exploring parts of the world that had basically never really received much attention. You know, like the Ogre Kingdoms had given us some goodies about the Mountains of Morn, but the Ogre Kingdoms always felt like they were kind of on the periphery, and they were sort of a bonus faction that were just that, you know, showed up in 6th edition and just kind of hung around. This book was the first time where the ogres got to feature heavily as part of a campaign, because they go up against Tamurkhan's horde. And Alan even went so far as to explore Grand Cathay, where one of Tamurkhan's lieutenants, who is not in Total War Warhammer yet, but the good old Sile the Faithless, breaks away a part of the horde, and he attacks the Tower of Asher, which you can see in Total War Warhammer as a reference to this book. He attacks it, and it does not go well for him, because Alan gets to show off how fucking crazy Cathay is. How have they stood against chaos all these years? And they show it by a big old horde of mammoths and beastmen getting their asses absolutely annihilated by Grand Cathay. And some of the creatures that were introduced there showed up later in Total War Warhammer, though they were reimagined to make them a little more fitting. Because the Grand Cathay in this book is fascinating, but it's a little more just kind of like Eastern aesthetic as opposed to Chinese aesthetic. But like the Onyx Crowmen in this book are more like giant stone construct bird things, and then Total War changed them into elementals of yin, which I think works quite nicely. But it set the stage for a lot of the things that we got to see later, which was super duper exciting. And from there, he brings back the Chaos Dwarfs, which a lot of people thought was impossible. You know, they were, as far as everyone was concerned, the Chaos Dwarfs had been fully squatted and were basically non-existent. And not only did he bring them back, but they featured as a main character, main faction, because they are the of the 3 factions featured in this book, they're the second one, which is wild. And they had beautiful lore that took the lore that had been written before and just modernized it, which was super exciting. And the book, it just keeps going. And the other thing that I really liked is that, very uniquely for a Games Workshop product, though it's actually a Forge World product, is that it was a self-contained story. It has a beginning, middle, and an end, where Tamurkhan full-on dies in the end. And it's not the typical situation of like, oh, we're going to introduce a bunch of characters and then they all escape and survive at the end, so that there's not really an ending. No, it tells this big old story that ends with the big bad, or the main character who you've been following the entire book, dies. And it does leave behind Drazoth the Ashen and Elspeth von Dragon, because they're like, we can do more stories with them later, where Drazoth retreats back to the Darklands, and Elspeth, it mentions, is like heavily wounded, but survives and will continue to haunt Nuln. But it was like, I think it's a decade before she's really seen in public again, because she was so exhausted magically exhausted, and like it took a toll on her, the whole incident. But it was a fascinating story. And it really built up the idea of the excitement of, oh, where's he going to go next? Like, where is Alan going to take the story next? Because it was very clear that the next story wasn't going to be about another invasion of the Empire, most likely. It was probably going to be somewhere else.
Like, oh, hell yes.
Yeah, of that he was building up, like, what if I invade Grand Cathay? Or what if I invade Ulthuan? Or what if I invade Nagaroth or Lustria? And there are little hints about what kind of books were coming from Forge World, because Forge World was going full steam ahead on this concept, where the next book they were working on that they did next was the Monstrous Arcanum.
Yep.
This was also designed to be part of a series, because there's a 1. This was book 1. Beautiful book, very high quality, much shorter, but it featured a bunch of creatures that if you play Total War, you probably know and love them. And if you play the roleplay game, you probably use a lot of them now, where it expands the Famir. It brings us our Skinwolf Werekins, our Praetons, the Basilisk comes back and got a complete redesign.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like, it's no longer a petrifying creature. Instead, it like turns you into poisonous radioactive sludge, which is like, oh, that's even worse. And it took all the creatures from the Tamurkhan book and standardized them for Storm of Magic play. So they were continuing to iterate on what had come before, and everything was super duper exciting. And they had already started working on a new book, which I think was going to be like the 4th Battle of Blackfire Pass, where Karl Franz becomes the emperor we all know and love. And they had already started working on minis for it with the River Troll Hag, the giant River Troll Hag model, and the Squig Gaba, which is the big squig that spits smaller squigs at people. And everything was looking really, and these things were selling like goddamn hotcakes was the thing. Like in my local scene, the amount of people that were running just full-on Chaos Dwarf armies in competitive play was insane. And those were not cheap. Like,
no, they weren't.
Getting Forge,
expensive.
Yeah, especially getting Forge World in the US at that time meant you had to buy from England and have it shipped to you here. It was horrifically expensive. And yet they were still running full armies.
But there was a problem. Arguably a really big problem. And I'm going to actually hark back to my own personal anecdotes to provide an example of what that problem was. Back at the beginning of the century, so back at 2000, I was still working for Games Workshop. And I remember going down to a manager's meeting. So this is a big meeting for all the managers across the company. And there was a discussion held at this one about effectively how their sales were going and what was going down. And what I found really fascinating was that every single last one of them were playing 40K. And their sales were dominated by 40K. Dominated. Not they sort of were close. Dominated. And there was me, a staunch Warhammer. I played 40K too, obviously. But a staunch Warhammer defender and player. Where the sales in my store were significantly weighted to Warhammer. And I was approached by who was, at that point, the head of the company. And he said to me, why? Why are you selling so much Warhammer and nobody else is? This is a conversation that is being had down here, and we want to know why. I said, the answer is simple. I play it all the time. I play it with customers. We go to local clubs. We're playing it there. The game is actually brilliant. The background is brilliant. The big thing is we're playing it. Not long after that, a memo came out saying that everyone must play Warhammer in the shops, which I thought was hilarious because that wasn't going to fix it. Because that wasn't going to make everybody want to play Warhammer. That was just stupidity. What they needed to do was to get people wanting to play. But the problem was, as the years went by from then, that 40K was so popular that the staff themselves were playing 40K more than anything else. So the people who were the line that was the barrier and also the front line of the push for Games Workshop were pushing 40K themselves because that's what they loved. They weren't pushing Games Workshop as a whole, even though if someone came in and said Warhammer, they say, yeah, I'm collecting a Warhammer army. I'm talking on the macro level rather than down to individuals. This not only didn't change, if anything, it got worse. The novels started focusing more and more on 40K things because they sold in bucket loads for Black Library because it's what everybody wanted to read. And that didn't mean that Warhammer would be less popular because of what it was. Because in my store, it wasn't. It was as popular, if not more so. So it had nothing to do with the game. It was all to do with the focus and how it was being portrayed outwards. And come the time of the 8th edition, Warhammer sales were already a fraction of 40k effectively. And they were in the studio looking for ways to turn this around. And they tried, as Sotek already discussed. There was some new ideas brought to the table. They tried to rebuild it. They wanted to take Warhammer, which was their core product, and they wanted to bring it up to the same level as 40k. They wanted it to sell as well as 40k, and it didn't work. It just didn't. It just didn't. Warhammer was not selling as well. Not because of whatever reason you may have heard, all of the reasons you've heard, plus more. Now, the reason I've added here is because more people were playing 40k and to a degree that's true, but that's because it was so much easier to collect an army for 40k. Skirmishing troops were so much easier to put together into an army. There was so much less control over exactly how armies could be expressed. The army lists were often smaller, more unique. 40k had moved past its original origins. Warhammer had been the same game since 3rd edition and had done nothing new, and had almost captured itself in this wrapped up version of what the game should be. And bluntly, it was hard to get into.
It was expensive to get into.
Really expensive.
8th edition in particular was very model heavy.
Particularly when you went into the big armies, a huge unit. And they were turning it around. But when I say that the ship was righting, it was doing it very slowly. And clearly, without any awareness of the decisions that were made behind the scenes, well, I've spoken to some people, but only some. The decision was made to just restart. And restarting meant completely restarting. Now, we're not going to dive deep into the depths of what happened here, because that's not what this stream is about. But what it did was it ended Warhammer with the end times. Obviously, they took all the things that they've been working towards using for their 8th edition and they repurposed it for Age of Sigmar. So everything that was working towards their 8th edition variants, they went, no, let's move that into the next one. All the designs moved into the next one as they started thinking about the next game they were going to do. And then Forge World were left going, you what now? And from the outside, you could see it clearly, because suddenly everything that Forge World was offering was kind of brought to a halt. All the things they were doing were brought to a halt, and it felt reactionary. It felt like they had a great product, which was Warhammer, and they didn't know what to do with it. So the only thing they could do was make it like 40k. And they gave that a damn good go, and then in time realized that perhaps not making it like 40k was wiser, and instead... I think it might be fair to say that Age of Sigmar has instead just looked outwards at all the fantasy products on the market and said, let's take all the best bits. So they've taken in bits of Dark Souls and they've taken in bits of
GW doing what GW does best.
GW.
What if we just take everyone else's idea?
Just get the rest of stuff and pop it in. And boom, Warhammer was dead. Boom, Tamurkhan and the entire setup was brought to an end, which is a really nice 1 hour later. You've switched my telly off. Excuse me, I can't see you anymore because my daughter has switched off all my screens. Let me just bring you back there. Hey, there you are. That was actually hilarious. Thanks, Joe. So it was all brought to an end, and all of the great, gorgeous beauty that was being put together by Forge World for the Warhammer world, the great dream of tomorrow came to an end. But that doesn't change the fact that we still got this beautiful book and we still got everything that it offered. And as we're hopefully going to move on to another screen, as we're hopefully going to move on to, it added loads of cool new extra stories, and they all felt really very much Warhammer stories rather than feeling like 40k stories that they've sort of repurposed. No, this is a Warhammer book. It doesn't feel like they're trying to attract the 40k audience. It feels like they're trying to say, you know, this stuff that you love about Warhammer. Well, we're just going to give you Warhammer Plus. We're going to dial down deep in it. And we're going to do it with factions that are not normally discussed. Nurgle, arguably the least popular of the Chaos Gods at this point. That's what we're going to focus on. Oh, yeah. And we're going to do that with Chaos Dwarves. Yeah, you thought they were gone? Wrong. Not only that, we're now going to go into the Empire, a faction that, believe it or not, was not selling at all well. We're going to go into the Empire, a rather dull, staid, tried and tested faction, and we're going to really vamp it up and bring in some super crazy stuff. Bring in the land ships. Beep, beep.
Yeah, well, and
amazing.
They came at it, of all the things, and like, they could have come at it from the angle of like, oh, look, it's everybody's favorite Reichland, but instead they were like, no, it's Wizenland and Nuln.
I know.
Field.
and focusing on stuff that nobody else was really working on. And that for me was just beautiful because we were finally getting something more from Warhammer. We weren't just going to the factions that we knew and loved. Now, as Sotek said, we had a bunch of stuff coming from the studio where they started trying to do this, but this felt like they were nailing it. They were actually doing it. And again, you just had that feel that there was definitely a break between the studio and Forge World. Just a break.
Almost like that's still happening to this very day.
And it's exactly the same issues we see today with the old world. Yeah, quite.
Yeah. Anywho, before we get on that tangent, let's pivot and talk about actual Tamurkhan.
How about, before we actually talk about Tamurkhan, we do our super chats?
Yeah, we'll do that too. Okay, so let's get caught up on those really, really fast, and then we're going to hop into actually discussing lore. We appreciate all your patience, but I do think that is a genuinely really critical discussion to understanding the importance of Tamurkhan and why so many people have lashed onto it. And especially since the resurrection of fantasy, the obsession over Tamurkhan has kind of reached a fever pitch, which is tragic, but also interesting. Like, I half expect almost any day now, especially with Total War having released all the stuff from Tamurkhan, I'm almost expecting like a release the Snyder Cut cult to start up about the other 3 books that Alan was working on, because I bet $1 billion those are lying around in a
at least some of it. The plans, at least. Oh
yeah, just let us put them out for free. It's just a bonus. People can make their own minis.
Yeah, that's never happening.
I know. I mean, hell, I'll buy them. I don't care. Hammond, did you know male spiders pollinate female spiders with their front legs? Make you think twice when Spider-Man yells out Mary Jane. I'm moving on. Then Schmeister. Would Papa Nurgle still love me if I was a worm? He would. Yes. Absolutely. He'll love you no matter what. EG Cruising, do you plan to cover what Tamurkhan's invasion would affect? Yes. Yeah, we'll talk about what the ramifications of what the book presents here in a moment. Though, when it comes to talking about Wizenland and Nuln specifically, that's gonna be more next week. Because next week is going to be focused on the Empire. So
just to make sure that is covered very clearly, the Nuln impact is very much the Empire section of our 3 discussions. And for all this feels like it's the discussion about the book as a whole, it's not. This is Tamurkhan, and Tamurkhan is intrinsically linked to
his name just happens to be on the cover.
Indeed. So this is when we've decided to talk about this aspect of it. But the impact on Nuln, that'll be next week. You'll find that over on the Lorehammer channel side of things when we take up part 3 of our 3 parts.
Yeah, that'll be next week.
Yeah. Thanks, EJ.
Hello, it's Josie. Enjoy streaming, she says as she turns off the screen.
As she turns off my screen. Shakes fisted Josie.
Enjoy this! Turns off. Also, your pawn has dragon plague and is trying to spread it to mine. I knew the Nurgle string was on this week.
Yeah, that's perfect. Dragon's Dogma, reflecting Nurgle.
Sean Schultz, what's warm and hot? A warm. Ugh. I'm moving on. Y'all are struggling this week. I know it isn't much, but just love Lorebeards. Hope you continue. Well, hey, no, please, just showing up and watching it, and especially hitting that like button is more than we could ever ask for.
Thank you so much.
Throwing $1 our way just helps even more. We appreciate it. Thank you. Still loading. Good afternoon/day. Does Tamurkhan reproduce? Why? No, he doesn't. Because he has no interest in doing so, and he doesn't seem to do it passively. So, he's very selfish and focused on himself. So he never went on to make kiddos.
I think that's definitely the case, but I also think that if they ever decide that he did, there would be no lore break.
Yeah. It would not be unusual to be like, oh, he had children during his escapades. Okay.
Yeah.
That would be my response.
Or
I would just go, all right.
He reproduces asexually, perhaps sheds himself into twice himself or something equally odd, but that would definitely fit the character.
Yep. Digmatter, never trust a follower of Nurgle. They're the only Chaos Acolytes who claim that their deity is beneficent, or at least has the capacity to be so. Oh, Nurgle will abate your suffering, all right.
So I'm not going to go into any depth with this because it's not the correct stream, but I fairly strongly and deeply disagree.
Well, to be fair, it is the Nurgle stream.
I would suggest all 4 Chaos Powers will claim to be, under the correct circumstances, and will be believed to be beneficent. But Nurgle takes a particular route that many believe is more enticing for one reason or another. But I would argue all 4 Chaos Powers entice in their own unique way and are just as beneficent. There's a reason that they are all extremely successful.
Yeah, they are corruptive influences at the heart of it. Charles CK, been watching Sotek since the Ogres Q&A. I don't even remember how long ago that was. Though that was fun. I need to get back to doing Q&As. I'm the one who's stuck in the questions about Cathay, and it probably answered me based on this book. If I was any Cathay questions I answered back then would have had to come from this book, because that's all we had to work with, other than like random little snippets outside of like
tiny snippet in Ogre Kingdom's book or something. There was almost nothing.
Yeah, but that is correct. Hammond, why are you successful? Because I'm anti-fucking law. Is that how you responded at that meeting?
I actually, just as a tiny little anecdote, where I pretty much almost said that. I was at a meeting and I was asked to give a speech about how I did Sundays, because I had big Sundays in my store that were different to how they were handling the rest of the company, where I was doing big beginner Sundays. And I spoke to who was the area manager at the time, and I sat down with him and I said, well, basically all I'm going to do is stand up and say, why? Because it's the right thing to do. And why does it work? Because I'm fucking amazing. So, I'll do that if you want me to do that. And he said, well, what's the substantive point? So I told him the substantive points, and I said, none of this is hard, and they all claim to be doing it. So basically, the difference between what I'm going to say and what they're going to hear is I'm fucking amazing and they're not. So do you want me to do that? And he said, actually, no. Actually, no, because that's going to make them all feel really bad. And I was like, yeah, so I'm happy to do it. But ultimately, I'm just going to be telling them what they know. And he was like, let's hold that till next time.
Let's table that.
Table that one.
Yeah. Inquisitor Thomas, clearly Warhammer died with Marius Leitdorf. Oh.
Actually, pretty close to that in terms of timing, but not quite.
Yeah, not quite. It lasted a little past him, but not by much.
A good bit past him yet, yeah.
CB4N, this conversation makes me think of how sad I'm going to be when CA moves on to Total War 40K. When that day inevitably happens, hopefully we'll just have gotten everything that was ever published, and we can be happy with what we have. Plus, it's not necessarily for sure that when they move on to 40K, which I do think is inevitable, that they won't also support fantasy in the background, because CA has done some surprising stuff about releasing DLCs for older games, even when you wouldn't think they're going to anymore. And as long as it makes them money, they'll do it a lot of the time. And Warhammer Fantasy DLCs sell like hotcakes.
And 40K will sell like hotcakes and may make the Warhammer sales look pale by comparison.
Yeah, I will say the real interesting thing would be I'll give some anxiety to a community, would be someone sitting as a fly in the wall going, man, these Warhammer Fantasy and 40K games are selling way cooler than our historical games. That would be the spooky thing for that community. That being said, Three Kingdoms did sell especially well initially. But
I think that's fair.
Yeah, so
particularly if Sega sitting at the top are looking at numbers going, Yeah,
I would say for historical fans, I would be very much hoping whatever the next historical title is a banger, because otherwise they may be the good old Simpsons "I'm in danger" moment. Laughing God, I feel like I need a mug of beer, warm fire, and a comfy high back chair every time Andy tells the story of the history of GW. Yeah, you'll definitely need to make sure you have a beard to pull on irritatingly when you get to that segment of going grumbling about
how dare they cancel Warhammer,
the mishandling of IPs. Jenny Fox 119, I'm working on my master's thesis about the development of 20th century fantasy, which it's much narrower in focus. How important would you say Warhammer is to the 20th century fantasy scene?
To the whole scene, not as important as many that are involved with Warhammer would like to believe. The influences upon Warhammer are definitely extraordinarily important. But if we take a look at, say, for example, just one thing that Warhammer influenced, and that's the Lord of the Rings movies. Orcs in that were Warhammer orcs in terms of how they were presented. Meat's back on the menu, boys!
It's like,
that's very Warhammer in terms of how they were presented. So be aware that the influences that come from Warhammer will be subtle, but they are quite deep, particularly when you move to the communities that were creating, for example, all of the models for Lord of the Rings. They were all behind the scenes fans of Warhammer. Many of them have moved on to create Warhammer stuff that are now licensed products at a later date. So their influence is there, but a lot more subtle than many think. So, for example, Warhammer, deeply influenced by, say, Lord of the Rings or Michael Moorcock, and similar. Michael Moorcock and J.R.R. Tolkien, enormously more important than Games Workshop ever will be. But Games Workshop is about to become, I would argue, much more influential, largely because if their TV project actually lands when they move into Amazon, and given the quality that came out with the Fallout TV show, it's very possible that 40K is about to move mainstream. And if that happens, the influence of Warhammer is going to be quickly and swiftly extraordinary. I'll say one last thing, World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
World of Warcraft is Warhammer to begin with.
Yeah.
It's become its own thing, but it was to begin with.
Yeah, I would say, Warhammer definitely, like, it has an influence that is like, oh, it should be noted in the 20th century, but it really hit its stride as just a whole set of IPs in the 21st century, in my opinion. Good luck on your master's thesis, by the way. Hammond, Warhammer died when they decided not to flesh out Astalia. Gloria alma media invictus.
Yeah. That almost made me sad. There was a point where we were deciding which books to do first for Warhammer 4, and I almost went south rather than west. So in the end, I decided that the first books we should do would be moving out towards the sea, Ulthuan, and then Lustria. And I sort of regret that because they're still following that plan. They haven't reached it yet. Their elf book, I presume, is about to come. They see have clawed their way through on fantasy roleplay. They'll move over to the elves, and they'll presumably, hopefully, move further. They did Lustria, for example. And I kind of wish that I'd gone south instead for my first plan, because by this point, we would probably have had in Astalia a version of it, Attilia a version of it, and almost certainly the Lands of the Dead, and possibly even some touch onto Araby. So, yeah, I'm a bit sad about that one.
Well, you can't be everywhere at once.
But hey, we got a Lustria book and the Sea of Claws book, so
yep. Swarzaj, which granted, release the Road of Chaos books. Hey, don't ping us about it. We can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Fiberwolf throwing $1 away. Appreciate that. That's actually $2, but thank you. Hammond, since you mentioned your how do Pokemon races breed video, how would Tamurkhan? We're moving on. But like, in actual answer, like, I don't know, based on how worm-like he is, he would very realistically probably be a creature that you could explore the idea of you chop off a piece of him and it replicates into its own thing, which could be really nasty.
In fact, if you want to have Tamurkhan survive, it's something like that that's almost certainly the obvious next step.
Yeah, though his death
like a disease.
His death is rather extreme. Arc Throne, have you seen the Gold Flag Maneater leaks? Hype. Yes, I have. I'm very excited for.
Are they good?
Yeah, there's a in-game.
Oh no! Wait a minute. I have already seen it.
But yeah, it's very early though. It's very early, so it's kind of like Swarta, no joke. Using Tamurkhan and Corn Dragon model in my D&D campaign. Would love at least a description / art for the others so I can make them myself. Yeah, that'd be nice. Because like it's a huge mystery about. I will say the corn one's a little disappointing to me because it's so basic. I was hoping for something really exciting other than just a big dragon with a half-naked dude riding it. But it is what it is. Hammond, Andy's boss. Who are you? I'm the law. Yeah.
I might have done that a couple of times in the past. Or I'm playing I fought the law and the law won. I fought the law and the law won whenever I won a game of Warhammer. Good times.
I'm sure your opponents appreciated that every time.
Absolutely did.
For bullets.
Thanks
in Total War, Tamurkhan is a Nurgle legendary lord, but isn't he just a mortal chaos champion? So shouldn't he be in the Warriors of Chaos? So Total War, when they were initially developing the ideas for how they were going to do all the races, there was, I don't know if you were around or not for that leading up to Warhammer 3, but there was a lot of discussion about how they were going to split things up, because in Warhammer Fantasy, we had Demons of Chaos, Warriors of Chaos, and Beasts of Chaos, or Beastmen. And then like Chaos Horse and stuff over on the side. And that was how you delineated the various Chaos races. But when Total War was approaching it, they decided that they wanted to go back to splitting it in a different fashion that lined up more with what Age of Sigmar was doing and what 40K was doing, which was to split it where you had mortals, demons, and then the 4 major powers of Khorne, Slaanesh, Nurgle, and Tzeentch. And that meant that the mono gods, as they've come to be known as, were unified forces of that particular power. Which, if you go back into like older fantasy, those were also rules that you could run. Like if you went back and played 6th edition, it was Hordes of Chaos, where you just had combined armies. And in the end times, they brought that back, where you had the Legions of Chaos, where you just kind of picked a god and then you could run a whole bunch of stuff. So with Tamurkhan, you're dealing with a situation of the first answer question becomes, what is the difference between someone that is Nurgle and someone that is Warriors of Chaos with a Nurgle theme? Which is a very blurry as fuck line. And ultimately, the decision they came to was that, well, which faction needs more support? And Nurgle had 1 legendary lord with Kugath Plaguefather, and Warriors of Chaos had a ton of legendary lords, and they already had their Nurgle themed character with Festus. So I think it just kind of comes down to timing, where I think if they had released Festus the Leech Lord as like a Nurgle character, they would have put Tamurkhan
Mm-hmm.
Warriors of Chaos, and vice versa. Could both of them could go in either roster? It doesn't really matter. It's just a matter of timing and where they decided to put it. But there's no like clear like, oh, this is why he should go here. Because it's messy, to be frank. Like I'm still a little find it very bizarre that they ended up putting Azazel in the Warriors of Chaos roster. I really felt that he should have been in Mono Slaanesh as a demon prince. And then they could have used one of the like 3 mortal characters Slaanesh has running around for the Warriors of Chaos, like Sirkar or Dakala. Those would have worked very nicely for Warriors. But it doesn't matter. It's just where they decide to put people.
Yeah, I mean, cut a long story short, it's a messy set of factions. What would make it cleaner would be something like Warriors of Chaos have Archaon. When you've got Archaon, you can recruit Chaos-specific forces. Then you've got Chaos-specific forces who have all their own characters. So you've got Archaon and you go, hey, I've got Festus now. Yay! Because Archaon is the one who can bring in everybody. You could do something like that, but they didn't. Instead, they've just got this nice mulchy mess where there's some over there and there's some over there. And, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, and ultimately they're trying to give you as many different experiences as they can, and whatever, fine. Hammond, is Slaanesh's favorite author Michael Moorcock? With the name spelled different.
I am not even going to respond to that one, Hammond.
Dominic, love your content, Lorebeards. Could you ever see yourselves doing a show dedicated to languages / a language in the Warhammer fantasy world? Oh, languages, yeah, that would definitely. We could easily make a stream out of that. Thank you both for all these slices from this beautiful world. Well, thank you super much, especially for the generosity. We really appreciate it. There's a lot to say about languages, especially because if you go back to 6th edition and earlier times, GW had some people working there that were very, very excited to talk about language, and they included it in all their army books. When you got into like 7th and 8th edition, they kind of started focusing less and less on the background and more on just the game, which was unfortunate. Because like the 6th edition and 7th edition books had like whole sections dedicated to like, this is how you speak the language and pronunciations. Here's some grammar rules. Here's like what the written language looks like, which was super exciting. And a lot of those faded out with time.
It all happened because of the dwarf army list back and forth. Because the dwarves had it, so surely others should have it too. And that got developed as you moved into the later editions.
And Ledor, I only hope that if CA makes their Total War fantasy game, makes another Total War fantasy game, they don't do another Troy 2.0 where they try to get their cake and eat it too with all groups. I mean, to be fair, Troy, from my understanding, was a super fun game, and a lot of people really enjoyed it. But it was also like kind of a saga game, so it wasn't like a full thing. But anyway, so Tamurkhan only took us like an hour to get to the hour and 10
Where
minutes.
You go.
So, what is the actual point of this stream, which is to talk about the Nurgle forces that show up and kind of speedrun a little bit with the Tamurkhan the Throne of Chaos series. So for those unaware, just to kind of set the stage, the whole concept of the Throne of Chaos from a lore standpoint is that there's basically a prophecy. There's this big prophecy among the various hordes of chaos that there is a mysterious place or a concept known as the Throne of Chaos that states that there is a group of 4 champions who are brothers, that one of them will successfully fulfill a prophecy where they will take, after a great campaign and slaying many mighty foes, will arrive at some great city or location where they will fight an epic final battle, and their prize will be that they will ascend to claim the Throne of Chaos. And upon taking the throne, they will ascend to demonhood, essentially, and become a great, glorious champion of the dark powers. So the idea behind the Throne of Chaos series is that you're going to follow, each book follows one of these characters on their attempt to claim the Throne of Chaos for themselves, with the prophecy suggesting that one of them will succeed, whether that was Alan and Rick Priestley's idea as they were kicking the story around, or whether all 4 of them were going to fail, is, up to interpretation. But the first character, and unfortunately the only character we get to see attempt this story, is Tamurkhan. And Tamurkhan is, as for who he actually is, according to myth, and it's very, very important, you need to understand that this is a mythological telling. The book makes it very, very clear that this is not truth. This is in-universe speculation. Alan did the thing you're supposed to do with these books, which is really smart, which is that a lot of it is left up to interpretation. And even the entirety of the book and everything that happens in it is written by an in-universe character by the name of N, who his whole thing is that he's basically giving a report of everything that happened. And so, according to stories, Tamurkhan is one of the 4 sons of an entity known as the Great Kurgan. And according to these stories, the Great Kurgan was, thousands of years ago, there was this super big badass among the Kurgan, which if you're familiar with Warhammer lore, you know the Kurgan. The Kurgan are often kind of considered to be the big bads of the tribes of chaos. Like the Norskins are like little babbies next to the Kurgan in many tales, where the Kurgan are like, when you're dealing with the tribes that will rise up in the north to become the warriors of chaos, the Kurgan are the most terrifying, the most bloodthirsty, the most ruthless. They tend to hang out really close to the realm of chaos because they can survive in like any harsh environment. And the other 2 major tribes, being the Hung and the Norskins, are preyed upon by the Kurgan. And they're just super duper nasty. So the story says that there was once one great Kurgan who was mightier than any of them and made a great empire for himself up in the north, and he kicked a lot of ass, took a lot of names, yada yada. And the reason he was able to do this is that he made a pact with the 4 gods of chaos, where he got all of them to throw their support behind him. So he was kind of like an Everchosen, but instead of doing it to bring about the end of the world, he was more doing it for just his own personal glory and yada yada. And the price that he had to pay was that one day he would have to give an equal payment essentially to each of them. And so as his story goes, he conquers this great empire, and then eventually he has a set of quadruplets. He has 4 sons. And when his 4 sons are born, a great storm rises up as the 4 winds representing the 4 powers come in, and each of the winds claims one of his sons and whisks them away to raise as their own. And the Great Kurgan was so heartbroken by this and was so crushed, I guess, by this, which kind of says some interesting things about him.
It really does.
That he was that paternal of a figure, despite being a horrifying warlord, that he...
It's one of the things I think Warhammer actually does really quite well. When it's working at its best, and that's it tries to ground many of the most horrific figures back into reality. And when Warhammer's at its best, they remember that these are people. They're actually people. And for all this is clearly a mythical retelling of how these 4 great brothers were born. And for all it might be absolute nonsense, the fact that it's got that small touch of humanity lying through it really does make you feel like it's got the kernel of truth attached to it. And I really quite like that. Tiny little detail, but I liked it.
Yeah, like I do love the way it puts it too, of that, like when his sons were taken from him, he shed no tears, and raised up his skull chalice in thanksgiving to his masters. However, from that day forward, all of his victories would be hollow, and all pleasures taste only of ash. Like he basically becomes super depressed.
Yeah.
And from that day forward, the blessings of the dark gods was no longer upon him. So he starts losing and losing and losing. And then eventually he's killed and falls in battle. But by that point, he was no longer the great legend he was, and he just fades into myth. So that's Tamurkhan's dad, and that sets the stage. And what's interesting is, supposedly, if this myth is true, this happened thousands of years ago. So Tamurkhan is old, super old. Like even by Warrior of Chaos standards, that is an ancient ass character running around. The only characters that are that old that are still mortal are the likes of like Decay or Arbal the Undefeated, who are characters that tend to be running around and usually hang out in the realm of chaos, or they weren't human to begin with.
Yep.
So with that all in mind, we catch up with Tamurkhan. We literally catch up with him in the middle of a giant battle, which is the Battle of Zambijin, which is the great lost city that is way up in the north in the plains of Kadatha, which is like almost as far north as you can go before you start bumping into the realm of chaos itself. And there's this great ancient city where apparently thousands and thousands of people died, and there's lots of glory and goodies up for grabs for whoever wins this great contest. Because what it talks about is that Zambijin is a gathering ground where many times over the course of history, a representative of each of the four powers comes to this great battlefield, and they have a big old fight, and they throw down with each other, and whoever wins gets to claim all of the various hordes of the four champions as their own, and will go on to do like a big campaign. So it's kind of a high risk, high reward type situation. And of course, Total War Warhammer plays around with this, because you might go, oh, Zambijin, that's from the Champions of Chaos DLC, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yes, though they changed the story a little bit to match it more to Archaon's tale. But for Tamurkhan, it was basically just a big fight, and whoever wins gets to walk away with the goodies of everybody else that participated. And for Tamurkhan, the situation basically is that he shows up along with his horde. The Tzeentch character hilariously looks into the future and sees that he's going to get his ass kicked, so he just leaves. He's like, nope, not even doing this, I'm out. And then the Khorne and Slaanesh champions are like, nah, we're going to stay and fight. And the Khorne champion gets his shit kicked in pretty quick, and it ends up boiling down to, interestingly, Slaanesh versus Nurgle. And we get this epic showdown between the two of them. The big Slaanesh champion being Sargath the Vain.
Sargath, that's it.
Yeah, so him and Tamurkhan have their really big showdown, and as a very excellent way of storytelling, Sargath actually wins. Sargath manages to cut down Tamurkhan, defeats him, and turns to the hordes and is like, yeah! And while he's not paying attention, he doesn't notice the horrible little cracking and scrabbling sound behind him, as he didn't kill Tamurkhan. He just ruined his puppet body. And Sargath turns around, and Tamurkhan, the maggot, who's like a 3 to 4 foot long, horrifying maggot creature, bursts out of the body he was in, and he latches onto Sargath's face and eats his way inside Sargath's body, and then puppets him as his own. And Tamurkhan is declared the victor, because Tamurkhan is a fucking horrifying maggot creature. He's not the ogre. He's not the man. He is literally this giant, horrifying. Here, I'll show you the original artwork that was made for him.
There he is.
He is super fucking gross. And there you can see there's the champion whose body he just burst out of. Mm-hmm. So Tamurkhan, it's revealed by this point in the story, is a horrific maggot creature that has essentially been jumping from body to body to body. And he possesses them, though it's a very different form of possession than we normally see in Warhammer, where it's a etheric entity possessing you. He is a physical entity possessing you, which is super duper gross and gnarly. And it's revealed that that's what he's been doing for hundreds, if not thousands of years, is that he quite literally, he possesses a body that it's dead. Like, it's very important to realize that when he takes over a body, it's deceased, so it will begin to rot. It slowly starts to break down. So he has to jump from body to body to body, because eventually the body he's possessing will break down to the point that it's just no longer that great. Because even though he can puppet them very well, they're still degrading. He can't extend them forever, which is a very important note for what happens to him later, because he eventually will screw this up. So he takes Sargat's body, and hey, that's his new one. Now, you may be asking, I thought you said Tamurkhan was the son of a man, the Great Kurgan. Why is he a big maggot boy? And the story addresses this really hilariously in that it says that supposedly he's just very heavily mutated, where over the course of his sagas, he's mutated to such an extent that he became a maggot. However, there's a note that where the person who's essentially writing these tales tells you that may not be true. It could be that Tamurkhan has nothing to do with the Great Kurgan at all, and that's just a story that he made up to make himself seem more like a glorious champion. But in reality, he may have been an actual corpse maggot that just was somewhere way up in the north and has been eating people, eating the corpses of chaos champions and battlefields for so long that he just started to swell and grow as he feasted on the unnatural energies of the north until he became a sentient, large maggot creature that earned grandfather's favor. Both stories are equally likely.
And this is good Warhammer writing. So my interjection in this one isn't going to be to deepen the lore. It's instead going to be to do something that we love to do here, but don't often, because sometimes the lore is weird and contradictory and just a bit daft. In this case, it's not. In this case, it's lovely, brilliant stories being brought to life and given some deep, unreliable narration where you can't be certain which version is true. All that you can be certain of is that there is this horrendous, maggoty, awful champion of Nurgle that somehow manages to corpse puppet his way from corpse to corpse to corpse in such a horrendous way. And the myths that have arisen around this entity, the legends, are what is shared with you, not what happened. And I think this is one of the examples of where the Forge World book absolutely blows away much of what was coming out of the studio at this point, where they very much gave a very clear and very certain voice to every one of their books, which was a God voice. It was basically up at the top here, we are telling you this is how these things came to pass. And that meant that sometimes they contradicted themselves because they didn't, a writer at hand, didn't feel the need to research a previous book or might not have been aware of a previous book, meaning that they often contradicted themselves. Here, it doesn't matter if you contradict yourself because the writing is not just solid and sound in the fact that it's clean and doesn't need to rely on anything else, but because the writing in the way it's presented very clearly makes it certain to you as the reader that the people in the world literally don't know themselves either. And that is great because it means that you no longer have this issue of, oh no, here's a new thing. What are they going to do with this new thing? How's it going to contradict everything else? And I remember the first time reading this, just flicking through the pages going, God damn it, this is better. This is good. This is clean writing. This is good writing. It's a lovely, epic, massive, over-the-top story that Warhammer absolutely adores, and Warhammer does so very well, but it also isn't overriding everything that the studio, for example, was writing. And I'm going to argue that one of the reasons for this is because they were Forge World, and they were not the sole custodians of the world. What they were doing is they were taking the design studio's world and adding their own thing to it, which they couldn't say certainly existed. All they could do is add cool shit that was deeply loved Warhammer, but didn't contradict any of the other books. So by design, it doesn't. And that design ethos makes the book so much better. The fact that they don't have, one would argue, the right to just define what the Warhammer world is, and instead they have to muddy the waters, or in this case, muddy the diseased filled pools really does make the narrative stronger, the overall acceptability of the book for us lore people on the outside going, well, how does this fit in? Oh, it fits in any way we want, really, because it's not pinned down. So my addition here is very much just a hat tip. Well done. This is how it should be done, or at least this is one way that it can be done. There are multiples. But this is a fine example. And if you're out there going, is this book worth it? I'm going to say yes, but I'm also going to say that the chances of you finding this book for less than
good luck.
$800 to $1,000 these days is almost none. Because whilst at the end of its run, they were selling for like £2.50 or however much it was at the end of their sales, the second it came to an end, those prices arced high.
Yeah, it's basically become like a collector's edition at this point.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
it
so
100% is. Shall we do a quick bunch of super chats before we do the next section?
Yeah,
I think that's worth doing. Just to make sure that they're not gone, and also to say thanks very much because you guys rock.
Yes, we appreciate that all very much. This one. Tamurkhan's boast that he is a son of the great Kurgan. If this is true, was this ever something intended to be explored in the other books? Maybe the other champion sons devoted to the other gods. Yes, like the opening lore page is a 2-page spread that the first page talks about kind of the reality of where Tamurkhan came from, and like as far as like where this figure suddenly kind of shows up in Zanbaijin and where he had been beforehand. And the second page on the spread is just a full page story about who the great Kurgan is in his myth. And it talks about how each of the 4 powers claim one of the kids, and that the prophecy of the Throne of Chaos is about them. So like that little aside, which it basically confirms that the great Kurgan story is true, as opposed to the whole like maggot rising up thing, because there's this prophecy revolving around it. Though what the author does that's clever is he supposes that he wonders if Tamurkhan is actually one of the sons of the great Kurgan, or if he just claims to be, to try and make himself seem like a bigger, more mythological figure. But from like an outside reader's perspective, you could probably safely say that he's one of the 4 sons of the great Kurgan.
Yeah, and I think that is the beauty of it, as I was just saying, because 1, you can't be certain that he is the son of the great Kurgan. 2, you can't be certain that the great Kurgan ever existed. 3, this is all prophecy, and everyone's chasing prophecy rather than chasing fact. It's just really nicely built together to allow them to present all of this stuff which could be real and really fits into the world, but doesn't have to be real. It's just really nicely put together. And it also quite clearly makes the mission statement of each of our books, each of the 4 books that we're about to present, are going to start at the same route. And that route is the Great Kurgan and the 4 Great Brothers. And where these roots spread out to as the Great Tree, or the roots go down, depending on how they build each of these individual books, we won't know until we get to them. But this book is going off in this direction from this initial seed. And that seed, I think, would have been fascinating to see, because I'm quite convinced that in the next 3 books, that legend would almost certainly have been twisted again and again and again, repurposing it according to the needs of the individual champion to hand.
Yeah, I would not have been surprised if each book starts off with the story of the Great Kurgan, but it tells it differently, just a little differently every time.
And that would have been lovely.
Yeah, Viper Wolf, do you think GW could connect the Throne of Chaos to Be'lakor? I think it would have been cool if he was the original who sat on the throne. I heavily suspect the last book in particular would have been very heavily focused on what the Throne of Chaos actually is. Because one of the big things about Tamurkhan that I'm going to get into in a moment with the story, Tamurkhan doesn't actually know what the throne is. Like he's chasing this prophecy because he wants to ascend to demonhood. But one of the things that ends up screwing him over is that he doesn't actually know what he's doing, which is really fun and plays really well into how prophecy works in the Warhammer world. Why is he heavily mutated? He's from Texas. Unfortunately, as a Texan, I can confirm. If you had to deal with my state's government, you would end up like a giant, horrible feast maggot too. Ricky Chapman. We're trying to design what Tamurkhan's siblings could have looked like from any info scraps about them. Also drawing a fan map for the Imperial Zoo. That's super cool. Please let us see that when you're done. We would love to see that. And trying to
because I've also done a fan map of that zoo back in days of yore.
Yeah, there's been a lot of people begging, asking very kindly for Andy and I to do something similar. That might be what we do for this week's Wednesday stream, is just kind of a fun goof, is kind of throw around ideas on what could have been for Tamurkhan's brothers. Because that would be very different than what we've done in prior weeks. So we might do something like that. I haven't decided yet. I'm still kind of figuring out how scheduling some stuff, because we need to do, don't worry about it.
We got stuff to do.
Yeah. Tamurkhan is a result of the American healthcare system. Yeah, Tamurkhan saw the prices of an ambulance in America and goes, nah, I'm just going to jump from body to body. It's way better. And I would say he's correct. Singemeister, if Aztec and Tamurkhan's invasions of the Empire had properly coincided instead of missing by roughly 1 year, how bad would that have been for the Empire? Well, I think it's perfectly fine just to ask, how bad is it for the Empire that Aztec comes down from the north, and then Tamurkhan, I think the year before, the year after, I can't remember, I want to say it's the year before, comes up from the south. Like, the answer would be that A, it would actually be fairly appropriate to what's going on in the Empire at that time, and B, shit would suck, yo. It would be the best way I could put it. But their stories actually work really, really well together, because they don't meet up. Aztec was stopped a fair bit north of there, and Tamurkhan only made it to Nuln, and he actually came up right beneath Nuln. So Tamurkhan, fascinatingly, didn't actually have a huge impact on the Empire as a whole. It really just would have been Wizenland and Nuln that suffered particularly badly from his invasion. But as far as chaos invasions go for the Empire, Tamurkhan was actually stopped really quick. But that's also because he went for like probably one of the most well-defended cities in the entire nation. So there is that. Hammond, prophecy, like fate and luck, is often fickle. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. So, getting back to Tamurkhan's story and just kind of slamming through real fast.
Just to note, we're at 22 timing wise, and we've got quite a few other bits to discuss. So
I'm gonna be moving quick. So
I'm quite happy to sit back. Power on.
Yeah, Tamurkhan wins the Battle of Zanbaijin, gets a lot of the horde. He starts making his way south through the Chaos Waste, and at this point, Tamurkhan has started gathering to him various lieutenants. So Case the Befouled had joined up with Tamurkhan a little bit before that big battle. Case, to put it very simply, because Case is not a super deep character, that he is, by Nurgle standards, he is messed up. He is basically someone who has fully, utterly, deeply given himself to Nurgle, to the point where he's quite literally referred to as almost a trinket of the Plague God, to be gifted to individuals who are pleasing the grandfather, in this case, Tamurkhan. Kask is, by Nurgle, it's worth noting that the name of the Befouled, in his case, is a little unique, because the title was not given to him by his enemies or people that do not understand Nurgle. It was given to him by other worshippers of Nurgle. They know him as the Befouled because of how deeply dedicated he is and what he has given up. Because it notes that his mutation, because he's mortal, like he's human, though by this point I would put that in quotation marks. The first thing that he gave was his flesh, where he became all bloated and nasty and scrabbly and stuff. The second thing he then gave was his voice, where he was so dedicated, he committed his voice to Grandfather Nurgle, and the plague worked its way into his vocal cords and rotted them and ate them away, so that he just has a gaping hole where his lower jaw should be, and he has no vocal cords. And now in Total War Warhammer, they let him make this goofy little sound when you click on him, but in reality, he wouldn't really make any sound. He would be completely silent, which would be even more horrifying, to be honest. And then the last thing that he gave was basically his will, or in a way, almost his sentience. Case is literally just an extension of Nurgle's favor. But he doesn't play a huge role in the story. He was just given like a really nice profile and is acknowledged as Tamurkhan's kind of right hand when it came to matters of warfare. He also introduced the concept of the Rot Beast, which is quite literally just thrown into the book. The Rot Beast, there's no mention of it till you get to the very end in the army list, and it's like, oh yeah, Case is so horribly mutated and stuff that even the steeds that he and his riders, because he has his own group of riders, which are the Rot Knights, are these horrible creatures that nobody even knows what they originally were. Nobody knows if they were horses originally, or if they were hounds, or if they were something else entirely, but they're so heavily mutated that they have all these cancerous growths, and they are so blessed by Nurgle that should they be cut or wounded in any fashion, pus explodes out of the wound, covers the wound, and it regenerates immediately. So they're really difficult to kill. And it kind of notes that they're these half demonic, half hound creatures that the origin is completely unknown, which is fun. So you have those creatures, and then you also have his other major lieutenant being Sile the Faithless. Sile is a super interesting character. So he is from a tribe known as the Dolgan, which are just another tribe of chaos that lurks up in the really big far north. But Sile the Faithless is called that because everybody fucking hates him. Hates his ass. Because his whole thing is that he is a betrayer. Now, what's unique about Sile is you may be like, oh, okay, well, Sile the Faithless, he's a shaman sorcerer, so he's a really, really powerful wizard, and he's a backstabbing piece of shit. So you might think to yourself, oh, well, obviously he's a worshiper of Tzeentch. No, he's not, because he betrays even Tzeentch. Because the concept, what's interesting about Sile the Faithless is where a typical Tzeentch follower has a certain pattern they follow when it comes to betrayals. And there's an intricacy, a plot that you're trying to weave, a story you're trying to tell. Sile's thing that's really funny is that the only thing he gives a fuck about is himself. The only thing he cares about is himself. And he's always just trying to get ahead and stay alive, which is surprisingly hard for him because he betrays everybody to constantly advance his own power and to stay ahead of everybody, which leads to incidents where even the Tzeentchians don't like him because he won't commit to that path. He won't walk the path of Tzeentch because he looks at it and he goes, no, that could get in the way of me doing what I want to do. So fuck that. I'm not going to do that.
I mean, just in terms of his character, it's very much shown with what he did when he met Tamurkhan. He's like, yep, we're screwed. Hey, Tamurkhan, you're my new best mate.
Yeah. He immediately betrays what he was doing and just
totally.
But so everybody hates him. Even though he is from the Dolgan tribe, they have completely cast him out and renounced him and refused to acknowledge him as part of their people because he betrayed them, being an absolute bastard. He's almost like a dog of war type entity in that he just joins whoever he feels like. And he has a creature that's referred to as a chaos spawn, though it's more accurately an etheric entity that he's able to like force into flesh. It's not exactly clear what it is. Yeah, Nightmaw. It's treated as a chaos spawn, but the way it acts is very unusual.
It uses much of the same rules as chaos spawn, but it's different.
Yeah, there's something off about it.
Which is cool.
Yeah, and he rides a big old war mammoth. The Dolgan tribe actually had mammoths and which having mammoths is pretty high tier for a chaos tribe. And he brings into battle a whole thing of mammoths. But even then, when he saw Tamurkhan, he was like, nah, we're not fighting that. we're joining up with that. I'm not fighting it. And Sile the Faithless is actually one of the few characters who survives the story. He actually gets away alive, if memory serves.
Sure he does.
Yeah, from Tamurkhan's invasion, because he betrays Tamurkhan in the end.
Exactly.
But and he's actually a very funny character throughout the book because he's constantly trying to betray Tamurkhan, and Tamurkhan knows that he's a faithless wretch. So what Tamurkhan does is he forces Sile the Faithless to be the front guy for the Horde. So anytime they need to talk to anybody or like negotiate, Tamurkhan sends Sile the Faithless to deal with it because he's surprisingly good. He has a silver tongue is kind of his gimmick. But so you have him, and he brought with him a lot of various soldiers from various tribes who he forces to serve him because he gets them caught in contracts and stuff, a bunch of mammoths and stuff. And then he gets joined up by a big beastman herd who unfortunately do not make it to the end of the invasion because of Sile the Faithless being an absolute bastard. And Tamurkhan and his horde, they come down, and when they're deciding about where to go, Tamurkhan knows he wants to get to Nuln. The prophecy that he has been told from many different shamans describes a city. It doesn't name the city, but it describes it. And Tamurkhan, through talking and torturing many people, comes to the conclusion that he has to get to Nuln. So what's fascinating about Tamurkhan's story is how he gets there.
Or how he even knows that Nuln exists.
Yeah, it shows what torture will get you.
Yeah, totally.
But Tamurkhan, amidst discussing with Sayal in particular, comes to the conclusion that he can't get there from the north. Because the problem with Nuln is that it's basically on the southern border of the Empire, or very close. And to fight your way there, you would have to go through, you'd have to do a diagonal across
Kislev.
the Empire and Kislev to get there, which would be borderline impossible. Like,
yeah, it's going to be a toughie.
So they come to the decision that, okay, let's not do that. Let's go around so that we only have to come up through the north. Now, what Alan did that I fucking love about this book that he certainly didn't have to do was that if this had been written in a typical Warhammer fashion, they would have come from the west. They would have gone to the ocean and they probably would have landed in like Bretonia or something, or near Marienburg or whatever, and then they would have just tried to shove their way to Nuln from there. Instead, Alan goes, I'm going to take us somewhere really exciting. And they go through the Mountains of Morn. So they come down to the mountains, and Alan does a pretty hilarious job of basically being like, okay, I'm going to make sure that in universe, my characters know about the other big characters from the army books. So like Tamurkhan and his horde, they know who Grease's Goldtooth is. And they know that they probably don't want to fight Grease's Goldtooth. Because if they do, the whole ogre kingdoms are going to show up. And it's going to be bad. Grease's is going to kick the shit out of them. Because at the end of the day, they are not replenishing troops very well as they're moving through all of these areas. Once they leave the Chaos Waste, it's kind of a war of attrition to try and get to where they want to go. So they avoid Greasus by staying further east of him until they get down to one of the mountain passes where they can shoot west to then get to the Chaos Dwarfs. Because they need the help of the Chaos Dwarfs. Tamurkhan, who is a big Chaos Lord, knows that when Chaos Lords tend to invade parts of the old world, the Chaos Dwarfs play a really key role. Obviously, in 8th edition, we have our Hell Cannons, right? Hell Cannons are crewed by Chaos Dwarfs. They're made by Chaos Dwarfs. It's very well established in the lore that a lot of the various war machines, armor, and weapons of the Hordes of Chaos are bought from the Chaos Dwarfs. So Tamurkhan wants to get the Dawizar on his side. He wants to bargain with them to get what he needs to crack open the city of Nuln. Which goes to Tamurkhan is a relatively intelligent individual. Like, he's very noted as being arrogant as hell, but he knows what he needs in order to break Nuln. Mm-hmm. And so
I find his direction actually super fascinating, because if you take a look at the long path that he takes, it's really far.
Yeah.
Something that we often forget with the Warhammer world is that it's bigger than the real world. Now, that writers sometimes forget this also, but that's by the by. It's huge. It's a really, really big place.
It takes years.
Let's just ground this into some context so you can get an idea of what he's pretty much what his endeavor was. He starts off at not far away from the North Pole. He drops down into Siberia, moves his way all the way across Russia, passes through into Europe, goes all the way down to Greece. From Greece, he passes through into the south of Europe and then pushes his way up into the heart of Europe. That is the equivalent of the distance he's covered, but bigger, because the Warhammer world is bigger than the real world.
Way bigger.
He goes forever. So you can see why the issue of attrition is absolutely core to the issues that he faces. Now, one of the great joys of Nurgle is that, you get a lovely check at just how much he's going to be covering on the map there.
Yeah, he goes way east before he goes south.
Yeah, one of the great joys of Nurgle, if you wish to view it as a joy, is that it's an infection, is that it's a plague, is that this is a great horde that, say, unlike greenskins, which is gathering greenskins as it goes, as they all pop up from various caves and their individual tribes gather together in a pool underneath the banner of an individual warlord. This is something that effectively does what it can to infect those around it and bring some of them into the force itself. You got to remember all these nurglings and horrible things, these demonic manifestations, they are all representing diseases which are being spread as they go. Effectively, imagine it like a giant slug. So the slug starts at the north and it leaves a trail of slime and horror wherever it goes. And from that trail comes more who may or may not move into the primary force at the front. But in the end, they have to fight their way across half the world. This is not a small endeavor. What is taken on by Tamurkhan here is quite simply a fool's errand that is almost certain to end in everybody's death, but he doesn't care because of the outcome that he's going for. He's fully aware of the dangers involved. He's fully aware of the horror that he is going to have to face to get there, but he has such a single-minded certainty that this is what's going to achieve demonhood for him. He will ascend and sit beside the gods in the realm of chaos, that he powers down with this. Now, you could, if you were looking at this from the position of someone who's perhaps not entirely insane, which I'm going to argue might not be a good argument, but regardless, from someone who isn't entirely insane, this is a plan that has clearly been going on within his mind for potentially decades, if not longer. So to answer my earlier question of how the hell does he know about Nuln? Because he's been planning this for a long time. How does he know about all the ogres? How does he know about the Chaos Dwarves? Why are the Chaos Dwarves a pit stop in his round the world tour? Because he has planned this for a very, very long time. He intends to ascend. This is his moment, his perfect moment, and he's given it a go. As we'll see, it doesn't necessarily turn out as he plans.
Yeah, so he goes very far to the east of the Ogre Kingdoms. Like, he doesn't go straight down through the center. He basically goes to the ancient giant lands, which is east of the domain of Grease's Goldtooth. He comes down through them, and because he went so far as the ancient giant lands, there's actually not a ton of ogre tribes in the ancient giant lands. They avoid those lands because it has too much chaos taint. There's too much warpstone dust in that high atmosphere back from the days of the Great Maw being formed. So he passes through that.
On that one.
Yeah, he passes through that relatively unscathed until Sael does what Sael does best, which Sael notices that they're getting very close to the Tower of Asher, which is the guard tower of one of the western passes from Cathay's standpoint. And Sael thinks, hey, you know what? If I can take that tower, I can loot a bunch of Cathayan goodies from there, and I bet there's a bunch of magical secrets I can gain for myself. So he gathers up all of the beastmen who are tired of all of this constant marching, and they want to fight. They want to do something. And Tamurkhan is one of the things that's really fun about the book is it plays very heavily on the politics of leading a chaos invasion. Of that the warlord has to be an iron fist that keeps his guys focused. And Tamurkhan's not very good at it compared to the likes of Archaon, for instance. And Sael manages not only to break away from him, but takes all of his mammoths, takes all of his beastmen, and convinces all of them, once again with this silver tongue, to go attack the Tower of Asher. It goes horribly. They attack the tower. It's a big siege, and at first, everything's going great until Cathay actually commits to defending. And the battle quite literally ends with Cathay realizing that the tower's being overwhelmed. So they do what Cathay does best. They throw a fucking comet at it. And Sael sees this meteor come launching down and goes, oh shit. And he casts a big spell that protects him. And only him. And basically,
I love Sael. He's the best.
All of the beastmen and all of the mammoths die. They all get absolutely obliterated. And Sael limps his way back to Tamurkhan's horde, having spent a considerable portion of it. And Tamurkhan is pissed. He's fucking furious. But he doesn't want to kill Sael because he's still useful. But there's a whole... The book actually spends some really fun time talking about how Tamurkhan tries to thread the needle of punishing Sael the Faithless so that he doesn't look like an inefficient warlord, while also keeping him alive so that he still has him and what's left of the Dolgans, being like a handful of surviving mammoths and stuff. But you may notice that Chaos War mammoths don't make up a huge amount of his roster, and that's kind of why, is because Sael wasted them all. So at this point, Tamurkhan gets a leash around Sael the Faithless because Sael realizes that he fucked up big time. And it's kind of a miracle that Tamurkhan didn't murder him. Close enough. This is the point where Tamurkhan quite literally starts keeping Sael next to him all the time and uses him as an ambassador. And that's part of the punishment. is that he's forcing Sael to be his tongue.
So flipping this on its head, I'm going to agree here completely with Sotek that loosely what we've got here is something that Games Workshop has not really plumbed into the depths of before. And one of the things that I said that this book does really well is going in depth with factions that you don't normally get much time with. So here we're getting an in-depth look into a Nurgle. Well, it's not just a warband anymore. This great Nurgle horde and the political factions that lie within it. They haven't done what is almost always the case, particularly for Nurgle, where they go, it's just this great amorphous blob. They all go in the same direction. They all work together, don't they? Well, the answer here is, yeah, no, they don't. These are still individuals. They've got their own hopes. They've got their own fears. They are a loose conglomeration of different tribes, peoples, effectively gangs, for want of a better word, all of whom loosely want the same thing at heart, and that is to survive and ascend. And that is expressing in different ways. Tamurkhan has the big plan, but Sael's sitting there off towards the side, who also has their own big plan with his big wobbly mutant head. Trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do too, and seeing how they constantly butt at each other as they're attempting to reach some sort of outcome that means they succeed rather than the other, but they need each other because of how powerful each of them individually are, and the fact that they are now far away from safe territory, far away from it. Now, they could leave, but the possible gains, should they succeed, far outweigh their individual dangers, or at least so they believe at this point. Particularly when you look at someone like Tamurkhan, who is pretty much a figure of pure Nurgle glory at this moment. Clearly, the gods are with him as he is stomping his way through. So moving away from him would be deeply unwise. Super fun. You could also build a really nice argument that Sael, for all he claims to be one thing, could just be a Tzeentch agent, looking to bring them all down from within the entire way through. And I really like Sael's character because of this, because it's been left open enough that you're just left looking at it going, Sael pretty much stymied this whole thing. If it wasn't for Sael, you could argue that Tamurkhan might have succeeded, at least in his primary goal of sacking Nuln. And that's really funny. Really funny when you look at it.
Sael is, he's an interesting problem. That has his moment a little later. But so anyway, with Sael the Faithless and that whole incident, Tamurkhan and his boys make a straight shot west. So they've gotten to the point where they have a pass through the mountains of Morn, and they're south of Greasus now. And at this point, the ogres have started catching on that somebody is passing through their mountains. And a lot of the tribes avoid them because they see the size of Tamurkhan's horde and go, nope, we're going to get our ass kicked. Yeah. Let's, that's not good eating, and it's just bad. Let's avoid them, or let's go. And Greasus starts calling the tribes to him because he goes, hey, those guys didn't pay my tolls. We're going to get their asses. And so Tamurkhan and his lads go, we need to get the fuck out of here. So they make a straight shot west. However, there's one tribe that says no. And that is the ogre tribe of Karaka Break Mountain, who is a huge fucking ogre tyrant. He is a big lad, and he gets his tribe together in one of the valleys and sees Tamurkhan coming and says, I'm going to fuck these guys up because they're trying to go through my lands and screw them. And this is not what Tamurkhan wants. He does not want an engagement right now, but he doesn't have a choice. And once again, to put into perspective how big the Warhammer world is, it is a year into Tamurkhan's campaign at this point. Yeah. It has taken him a year to get from the plains of Zambijin to this moment. So a huge fight breaks out between the ogre tribes that gather under Tyrant Break Mountain, and it all builds up to a big epic duel between Tamurkhan using the body of Sargath the Vain and his big toad dragon Bubabelos, and this tyrant, who, to be clear, does not have a mount and still goes absolutely toe-to-toe with Bubabelos and Tamurkhan, because he's that scary. And they have this
trust me, going toe-to-toe with that frickin' toad dragon. Good luck.
Yeah. So, as it goes, they're having their big epic duel. The tyrant manages to get Tamurkhan off of his toad dragon and engages him in more of a duel where, to be frank, Tamurkhan gets his ass kicked. because he's using a Chaos Rune Blade of Sargath the Vain, which is a very powerful weapon of a Chaos Champion. And Break Mountain is so scary and such a Chad that the sword gets shattered. Break Mountain shatters it with his own weapon just through sheer raw strength. He shatters the Chaos Rune Blade of a Celestial Champion and just tears Tamurkhan apart. Granted, he's wounded, he's tired, and as he claims victory, he's like, yeah! But Tamurkhan does what Tamurkhan does best, which is that he eats his way out of Sargath's body, and he leaps at Break Mountain, eats his way in to the Tyrant's body, and for the first time in his existence, he has an Ogre Tyrant body. And Tamurkhan realizes this body is powerful.
I can eat anything, says the Tyrant.
Well, yeah. So Tamurkhan gets a huge power boost at this point, and he's drunk on power. He feels incredible. And with the defeat of Tyrant Break Mountain, the Ogre tribe basically kind of gives up. And Tamurkhan takes most of them captive, but they agree to sign up with him relatively easily because ogres don't mind the forces of chaos like a lot of other factions do.
Yep.
They're fully willing to sign up so long as it means they get to eat and they get to fight. And Tamurkhan says, you know what? Y'all can feast on the corpses. That's my gift to you. So they do. This does not go well for them. They eat a lot of the corpses and it turns them into what are known as plague ogres, which are not simply ogres with the mark of Nurgle, even though that's how you end up having to play them in the tabletop game. They're just ogres with the mark of Nurgle rule. They essentially kind of start to melt.
Disgusting.
Yeah, they turn into something that is truly, absolutely. I'm trying to pull up the art for it. It's a really famous piece of art for just how disgusting it is.
Yeah, they're properly horrible.
But yeah, they just full on melt and turn into these big. Oh, here's some of them. This guy's actually a little more put together, but it'll do. It'll do. So they start to mutate and fall apart and grow horns and a bunch of other stuff. And once again, the artwork in this book is incredible. Like here's
pretty good.
There's artwork of Tamurkhan fighting Break Mountain.
Yeah.
Which is just absolutely fantastic. But so the ogres start getting infested with the plagues of Nurgle and turn into big, ugly, horrible things. And they just join up with his horde. So now he got a whole bunch of ogres, which helped fix the problem that Sael inflicted on them by killing all their beastmen. Mm-hmm. So they make their way.
You lose some.
Yeah, they make their way into the Darklands where they encounter the forces of the Chaos Dwarfs. The forces of the Black Fortress, which has been designed as to defend the eastern passes from the mountains of the Ogre Kingdoms and make sure nobody comes into Chaos Dwarf territory and screws with them in ways they don't want to be screwed with.
And given where we are, I suggest that we move over to our super chats.
Yes. All right. So, oh, wow. Thank you very much, Zara. It's very generous of you. We've been trying to reach you concerning your Ogre's extended warranty. You should have received a notice in the mail about your Ogre's extended warranty. Since we've not gotten a response, we're giving you a final courtesy call before it dies. Yeah, that's actually a very accurate portrayal of what's going to happen to Tamurkhan.
Yeah.
Love the content, lads. Not exactly sure on the time when Tammy's story occurs, but do you think there's a connection between Nuln being where they end up and that being the former seat of power for Magnus the Pious?
I think that's a super interesting question. And it's not really properly explored, particularly given you've got to remember before this, Nuln has also been sacked by Grom the Paunch, but not more than around about, how much earlier? We're talking about 100 years? I think it's about 100. About 100 years earlier, it's already been sacked by Grom the Paunch. So we're not talking about a city that hasn't had to rebuild and hasn't been the target of an external campaign before. So we don't really have a very strong answer for that. And I'm not sure if we're ever going to get one because given the Nuln lore that we have, and there's a lot of it, none of it really suggests that there is anything particularly important in terms of the greater overall, this city is important because it holds something that is integral to the gods. No, it's just a really important city. in the Empire. Unlike, say, for example, Middenheim, which is absolutely integral, not just to the Empire and how it got to become what it is, but also in external forces that are looking to take it down for what it means both spiritually and what it contains. So I think the answer to this one is, as at least as it currently stands, probably not, and possibly Tamurkhan was just mistaken.
Yeah,
maybe he mixed up Middenheim with Nuln.
Well, if I recall correctly, the prophecy, it's very vague how it
super vague,
because it's something like a city that is covered in like black powder and smoke and yada yada yada. Like it gives like Tamurkhan deduces it's Nuln, but there's nothing to say that he's right.
Yeah.
Necromancer Cobalt, I wonder if the brothers had received a gimmick, if the Slanesh brother would have basically been Lucius the Eternal, 40k character who revives from bodies of those who feel pride and death. I suspect they would have done something very different. I don't think it would have been, all the brothers are like Tamurkhan where they body hop. I think that's just Tamurkhan's gimmick. And they would have focused on other concepts. But it probably would have been a very unique concept compared to what we had seen beforehand for those types of characters.
Yeah, I actually can't agree more with what's said there, because this book really does make its own thing. This book doesn't feel like they're taking ideas from 40k and then bringing them into Warhammer, repurposing them and telling a new tale. Pardon me. This feels 100% like something that's unique, that has been created specifically for Warhammer to draw upon Warhammer tropes and to really show the Warhammer world at its best. So I think if they were to move on to, let's say, Slaanesh next, the character they would have made for Slaanesh would have been equally as unique, equally as interesting, and equally a perfect representation of what Slaanesh could be in a way that had yet to be properly explored. So I don't think it would have done a 40k copy-paste job. I think it would have simply gone, right, what can we do with Slaanesh that is unique, that is interesting, and just screams Warhammer?
Yeah, I would wager that probably the shared gimmick between the brothers is they all would have been relatively heavily mutated. Would kind of be kind of their unifying gimmick, so to speak. Because a lot of like the Warhammer fantasy models for like special characters were very clean. Like were very like not heavily stigmatized. And I think the Tamurkhan books would have very much expressed or the Throne of Chaos books would have thrown in the face of that.
I think so too, because one of the great mistakes you could argue of the Chaos armies is that they don't look like they're Chaos armies. They look like they are armies of people wearing armor or just normal tribesmen or whatever. They don't look like mutants. They don't look like the Chaos gods have blessed them. They don't look Chaos. Where the description of Chaos armies in the novels or the description of the Chaos armies in some of the editions clearly state there's mutation everywhere. Indeed, sometimes that was incorporated directly into the rules. If you take a look at the Chaos box set for, I'm going to guess 5th edition, could be wrong, might be 4th. But the Chaos box set, you had mutation cards you could just give to your units to show that they were all filled with mutant powers that could do various things. So even though your models didn't necessarily show it, they were considered to be all mutants. And it was something that I think that the Tamurkhan book did really well, is that they took in the concept of what Chaos was and they said, yes, they are proper mutated, all of them. This is one giant infested Nurgle army.
Yeah, it's heavily believed by the fandom, and there's reasonable evidence backing it up that the model Vorgoroth the Scarred was intended to be the next of Tamurkhan's brothers, because he didn't get he was one of those models that Forge World just kind of released during after the end times.
I don't remember Vorgoroth. I'm going to go check it up.
Yeah, which if you look at his model in detail, you can see that he is horrifically mutated. Like his flesh from his face is like melding into his shoulder, and he's covered in horrible scars and all this other stuff. And he rides on a big dragon that's got all sorts of horrible mutations. So like it's very likely that the Khorne book was next, and that he was probably Tamurkhan's Khorne brother. But unfortunately his book didn't get released, so they just put him out by himself because they had the model done. But because we know that happened with a couple of other Forge World things, like the Giant River Trollhag and the Squid Gaba. They just got released because the sculpts were done, but their books didn't come out, which was unfortunate. But they just did that for some things. So anyway, all that to say that all right, Cole Patterson. I love the variety of the Nurgle worshippers. They can go from edgy Chaos warriors to goofy carnivals of chaos. Which other Chaos followers have more variety? They do. It's just whether or not they've been explored well enough.
Yeah, and I often find that Nurgle is the one that's used most frequently for the horror and comedy. Pardon me, not the horror, the comedy. Sometimes Zinches because the funky little.
Just wild little horrors.
It's mostly the Nurglings et al. And they all work for a more humorous take. Sometimes I think they dial in it too hard though, and it ends up in many respects making what would be arguably the worst of the Chaos Powers in terms of it arriving in town. Just if you go against them, you die, whether they kill you or the disease that follows kills you. Just literally horrible. And they undermine that by just playing it up for laughs. But I broadly agree that I wish there was more to it, although I generally don't like using Goofy for chaos, generally speaking.
Yeah. Sauron, Tretch versus Sile versus Manfred. Who backstabs who first? I think based on personalities, I feel like Sile would probably be the first to pull the trigger on betrayal because that scene he does it quick. Like Sile is a quick and consistent traitor. I think Tretch's would be goofy as shit. And that Tretch would probably survive hilariously because his gimmick is that he's lucky. Literally in universe, his superpower is that he's just lucky. But Manfred would be the one who would actually succeed because Manfred's actually good at betrayals.
Manfred is tactical.
Sile is the best way I can describe his betrayals is he almost comes off like a character that just throws shit at the wall till something sticks. Yeah. But he throws a lot of shit at the wall.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Sale is for me a character that does it because it's in his nature, where Manfred does it because it's the correct thing to do according to Manfred's plans. So Manfred may never betray at all, ever.
In fantasy,
for centuries.
Generally speaking, Manfred has a very high success rate in fantasy when it comes to like his plans working out. Electric Count Sterling, no question. I just want to say thanks for the streams. I have an hour commute to school, but listening to this on the road makes me excited to go. Oh, well, thank you. We appreciate that.
That's super
Hammond, Tamurkhan won't come from the north or west. Our mercenaries in the southeast report he has forged an alliance with the Chaos tribes of the Po Valley. Po Valley. He intends to circumnavigate the Empire and then it cuts off. I feel like
I missed something there, Hammond.
Yeah, that feels like a movie reference or something, and I just don't know what it is. Hammond, over the Black Mountains, perhaps? Oh, okay, I get it now. It's a reference to the whole thing with what's his face that took the elephants way off trail and came over the mountains. Yeah, Hannibal. It's a Hannibal reference. Yeah,
Hannibal.
Over the Black Mountains, he will lose half his army from attrition alone. The other half will desert him. I suppose we'll bring with him an army of mammoths.
I was so busy going in my head. Where's Po Valley in Warhammer? I don't know Po Valley in Warhammer. Where the hell is Po Valley? I know Po Valley, but I don't know Po Valley in Warhammer. There'll be a reason for that.
Yeah. So anyway, Tamurkhan's horde, once again, just speeding through. They also got a whole bunch of giants because there are giants all over, obviously, the ancient giant lands. Yeah. So they capture a ton of giants in a pretty horrific piece of art that I love very much that shows the giants being captured. Which just kind of shows how tortured their existence is, which is actually really depressing. But it looks like a scene out of Attack on Titan, which is kind of cool. But anyway, so Tamurkhan, they go west and they run to the Chaos Dwarfs. And they're very loud about their arrival. And the Chaos Dwarfs are led by Drazo the Ashen, who sees an opportunity here. He has been exiled and trapped for a long time at the Black Fortress because he basically got kicked out by his master, Astragoth Ironhand, because he was growing too powerful, and Astragoth saw him as a potential threat. So Astragoth exiled him to the Black Fortress, where he has been building up power. And this ends up building up to an incident where he sees Tamurkhan's horde coming, and he has to decide what to do. Because according to, technically the rules he technically has to follow, he's supposed to fight them. But he sees opportunity to sell to them. But Chaos Dwarfs value power, not weakness. So he engages in what the book almost affectionately refers to as Chaos Dwarf diplomacy, which is that the Chaos Dwarves attack them with everything they have. They throw horrifying war machines, and Tamurkhan just knows this is the way it's going to play out. Because he has to prove that he's strong enough for the Chaos Dwarves to culturally consider it worthy to bargain with him. So a big fight breaks out, and Tamurkhan's horde suffers a horrific amount of losses, but so do the Chaos Dwarfs. And eventually Drazoth comes to the conclusion that if he could drag this out, return to the Black Fortress, and just let them lay siege and hold them off for maybe years, but inevitably he'll lose. And he decides that that's good enough for him. So he pulls back, and Tamurkhan sends Sile the Faithless to go talk to the Chaos Dwarfs. Which, he very well could die doing this. And Sile knows this and does not want to be sent, but he gets sent because of his earlier fuck up. So he arrives and he talks to Drazoth the Ashen, who there's a really funny note that as they're bargaining, there comes a point fairly early in the meeting where Drazoth in his head has been like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to commit a bunch of forces. I'm going to sign up. But he has an internal note that due to Chaos Dwarf cultural rules, he has to make the exchange as agonizing and painful as possible. So he drags it out for days just to make Sile as irritated and uncomfortable as he possibly can, which is just fucking hilarious. Of that, like within 2 minutes, he was like, oh yeah, we're going to commit to Tamurkhan's horde. But he doesn't say it for days.
Yep. Perfect. Love it. And it's those little details, because this is the sort of thing that if, for example, we were dealing with a standard army list, not only would this entire campaign have taken up not more than half a page, maybe even just a tiny little box in a corner where it would have said, oh, Chaos Lord marched all the way from the Northern Chaos Waits down into the Border Princes and then hiked it up into the Empire. And we had this. This is where we get to have some lovely in-depth cultural details for species that normally don't get any novels or anything else. And this, for someone who was looking at it for the first time, was just lovely. It was just lovely. It made the book super fun to read because we were going, hey, look at this. Oh, nice. Look, he's really dragging it out. Bless him. Oh, little Chaos Dwarf. Bless your soul. You're really making it shit for him. And that was good because we got to see aspects of a completely different culture in the Warhammer world, which is, again, one of the reasons why I personally was absolutely horrified to see this was going to be the only example of this particular type of book being released by them.
Yeah. But speaking of dragging on, one of the tenets to Drazoth's deal is that he needs Tamurkhan's help with something, which is that they have a dragon problem. And it's not just a dragon, it's a fucking nightmare dragon. Literally, that's the classification she is. They're dealing with an Emperor class dragon called Omdra the Dread, who, to put it simply, is about the size of the Black Tower. She's gigantic. And she's a necromancer. She's capable of resurrecting entire legions of dead by herself. And she has kids that are also dragons. And her artwork is awesome. This is Omdra the Dread. And for perspective, this little stuff here, that's Tamurkhan's army. Yeah. And that's how big she is.
And this is something that the Warhammer game itself does terribly. Because obviously they want to make a miniature for everything. So they bring out their big dragon. They say, this is the big dragon that has been in this forest for the last 4,000 years. Look at the little elves that are riding it. And you look at the dragon and you're like, wow, this dragon is not very big. And then they say, oh, but there are bigger dragons, but not here. And then you read the background. You're like, wait a minute. It gives the suggestion here that some dragons are properly huge. Like, I mean, huge. Like the size of villages, huge. Like possibly bigger, huge. Is that the case or is it not? And then this book comes along and says, yep, it is. It definitely is.
Yeah.
100% is. And I remember reading that again and going, wow, why didn't they do this in Warmaster?
Yeah. So Omdra is so big that it's basically her versus everybody. And Tamurkhan and the Chaos Dwarfs teaming up managed to wound her enough that she goes, you know what, fuck this. And she retreats back to her lair beneath the Darklands. They don't kill her, because the book quite frankly says it's virtually impossible for them to kill her. She's too big. But they can at least hurt her and cause her to retreat. So she does. And for the Chaos Dwarfs, that's good enough. So they give Tamurkhan the Black Cleaver, his really big axe. It's a demon-forged axe gifted to him by the Chaos Dwarfs as part of their deal. And they go off west. And they, so this is where he gathers up all of the Chaos Dwarfs to his side. So now his army is a horde of a tiny little amount of beastmen, plus a shitload of Chaos Dwarfs, a shitload of hobgoblins, a whole bunch of ogres, and then a bunch of warriors of chaos and various tribes of chaos that are so kind of your Norscan-esque equivalents. It's a proper chaos horde with many different combined elements. And they push west aggressively until they get to the World's Edge Mountains, where the dwarves see them and go, uh-oh. And the dwarves seal the holds and prepare for defense, prepare for siege, because they think they're about to be attacked. And much to the dwarves' genuine shock and surprise, they're bypassed pretty much completely. Like I think a couple of small outposts and mines get obliterated by the Chaos Dwarfs, who do it just to be assholes. But for the most part, just completely ignore them and keep going. And they go into the Border Princes, who have a horrible time. Horrible time. Yeah. The Border Princes get obliterated by Tamurkhan, because the whole thing about the Chaos Dwarfs is that as part of his deal, Tamurkhan has to agree to allow Drazhoth the Ashen to A, test his war machines to his heart's content on anyone they come across, and B, basically give him a large amount of the captives. So anyone that's captured will be given over to the Chaos Dwarfs, who will chain them all together and send them walking back to Zarnagra, or the Black Tower, the Black Fortress, as slaves to empower Drazhoth further. And for those that want a happy ending for this story, Drazhoth not only gets away alive, he captures a nightmarish amount of slaves. A ton of people get captured by the Chaos Dwarfs. So they push west across the Border Princes. This is where we meet some other characters who we're not really going to talk about, like Leopold the Black, who is also a treacherous son of a bitch. But despite the fact that because
I really like him.
Yeah, because he's such a treacherous bastard, he actually escapes from Tamurkhan's horde and brings word of warning to Nuln about what's coming. Yeah, so the Chaos, now, once again, the hordes of Chaos do something very unexpected, because a lot of people, the Empire, expect them, because the dwarves are sending warning, the Border Princes are sending warning, the Empire expects Tamurkhan's horde to come up through Blackfire Pass. They don't. They keep going west, because the Chaos Dwarfs have some old records that they've maintained from prior invasions, and also potentially some old knowledge of being dwarfs. Yeah. That tell them that there's another pass, a much not well-known pass. And so they keep going west and end up cutting up through the Black Mountains through a pass that basically nobody but the dwarves know is even there.
Yeah, because there's a well-known famous pass up there, Winter White. Was it Winter Tooth?
Yeah,
Pass?
Winter Teeth.
Winter Teeth Pass. But they go up to the side of that. And that's fascinating, because it's really close to a couple of holds, but not actually right where they are. And if you go back to some of the older lore, where it shows where all the dwarven borders are, they really, really quite neatly slice between them. And I remember when I read this going, hey, someone's either done their research on this and had a good think about how they're going to get through into the Empire, or alternatively, they lucked out here, because
also,
they just pretty much nailed it.
Some other cool pieces of art: the Border Princes at the time of Tamurkhan's invasion, which shows all the different kingdoms, which is super duper cool, and the ones that get these three that get curb stomped, and then the Winter's Teeth pass, where the Empire was not defending it, because, and you can see here they passed right through it, or right next to it.
Right next to it. There's the two holes. There's Dimnak and Hearn.
Yep. So now, hilariously, Tamurkhan's invasion is almost undone at this point by the most unlikely of foes, which goes to show how complicated the Warhammer world is, and also how good the fucking writing of this book is. Where you would think that, okay, it's finally here, the big build-up for the Empire versus Chaos, except greenskins happen. And as Tamurkhan is passing through the mountains, the Black Mountains, he gets a little close to the Vale of Goblins, which, spoilers, has a shitload of goblins. And Tamurkhan, him and his horde, do not think anything of the goblins. They're like, they're greenskins. What could they possibly do to us? We're a huge chaos horde. We've got the Chaos Dwarfs with us and our war machines. We're unstoppable. And we're talking gigantic legion of goblins do what goblins do best. They ambush the fuck out of them, where they wait for Tamurkhan and his horde to pass through some narrow valleys, and they start raining boulders on them. Trolls come pouring out of caves. Arachnarok spiders come crawling out of the forest. And Tamurkhan's horde finds itself under attack by a genuinely dangerous threat. And his invasion is almost stopped by fucking goblins. Which goes to show that, like, a lot of people see goblins and think of them as just, like, goofy, like, oh, these, they're just kind of a non-issue. No, greenskins are a problem. There's a reason they've brought the Kharaz Encore to its knees. And, like, a lot of people are like, oh, well, that was the Skaven. No, it really wasn't. Like, the Skaven took advantage of several situations, but the main antagonist of the old world for most of its history is the Greenskins.
I mean, in many respects, they were called the Goblin Wars for a reason.
Yeah. So now, Tamurkhan, to his credit, does defeat the Goblin Horde, because ultimately, even with their incredible ambush, even with a bunch of forest goblins and night goblins teamed up and all of their big monsters and everything, they're unfortunately not able to deal with all of this at once. Though there are some really fun notes about the arrogance of Tamurkhan and Sile the Faithless, and especially Drazoth the Ashen, who are genuinely upset at the losses they take from this attack, because they consider themselves so above Greenskins that when it's a bunch of mere gobos that actually destroy some of Drazoth's vaunted war machines and destroy a lot of important aspects of Tamurkhan's horde, they're genuinely very frustrated by it, especially because the goblins basically aren't able to be properly punished. They're able to retreat down into their caves, and Tamurkhan's horde briefly considers following them before Tamurkhan seizes control of his horde and says, no, we're going north, and forces them to keep moving, which is great storytelling. It's just super fun. This is how Greenskins hilariously save the old world more often than you would think, is that they cause the forces of chaos and the forces of the undead and other big threats like that to be diverted very heavily because there's such a problem.
Yeah, I mean, if you just take a look at the Empire's borders are largely mountains, and these mountains are largely populated by greenskins and worse. And the number of times when it's not greenskins that are the threat, that it's something else that they have to get through this great barrier of green is significant. There's a reason the Empire has lasted for so long, and that's because it's kind of protected. And the greenskins that do make their way down into the Empire, as and when that does occur, because that's expected, the Empire is entirely defended for that moment. Meaning that not only do the greenskins provide a barrier, they also kind of train up the Empire for when something gets through this greenskin barrier, because the greenskins are constantly probing and pushing at their defenses. So it is worth noting that the greenskins, for all they are one of the great enemies of the Empire, they're also arguably the reason that the Empire still exists at all.
Yeah. So Tamurkhan's horde has finally made it to the Empire. They finally arrived in Wizenland, or at least very close to Wizenland, to make their way up to Wizenland very briefly. And the Great Siege begins. And we get this massive, multi-page epic siege where the Chaos Dwarves war machines are trading with Empire war machines, and it's this great epic defense. The horde of cavalry goes out to fight against Tamurkhan's horde. They get their asses kicked. They get forced back to the city. And it's a terrible, horrible war. A great battle that takes great losses on Tamurkhan's side. It's this massive, glorious Empire city with tall walls and siege weapons and defenders, and all this crazy shit goes down. The Empire's using the river, which very clever, awesome part of storytelling is all these rivers in the Empire. The Empire uses the river for like boats that have war machines and soldiers on them to attack from other directions, or to harass the Chaos Hordes, as to use the river as a barrier to attack Chaos without being able to be attacked back. Yada, yada, yada. Chaos wins. The city is sacked. Tamurkhan marches into the city, declares his victory, and waits. And nothing happens. And he starts getting really upset because nothing happens. And he's there for days. And then they finally figure it out. This isn't Nuln. They attack the wrong city because nobody in Tamurkhan's horde actually had ever been to the Empire before. They were working purely off prophecy. And Tamurkhan obliterates this city thinking that it's Nuln and declares ultimate victory, only to realize after literal days of sitting there, not understanding why he's not a demon prince and getting incredibly angry, that he's at the wrong fucking city, which is hysterical. And also very accurate to what, because they see this city and all of them are like, this must be Nuln. Look how tall the walls are. Look how glorious it is. Look how many defenders there are. This has to be it.
So this is an important detail that many fans of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 missed. Because the writers of Warhammer...
it's the Fyldorf is the city that they just plow into the ground.
Okay, so Fyldorf is traditionally the capital down in south for Sudanland, but it got sacked And when the capital was mentioned inside one of the roleplay books in the archives, they completely messed up after I left and went, "Oh no, Fyldorf's still the capital. It's still doing." No, it's been sacked. There's a massive schism down in the south of the empire because the capital is gone, and Nuln is now in a position where it can push downwards without the same, let's say, pushback they might have had otherwise, because their capital is gone. The capital of Sudenland has had to move because it was completely sacked, and this was missed inside Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4. But the setup for that was made earlier because I was writing those sections, because Fyldorf had been sacked. It's gone. It's completely and utterly wiped out, which is why there's such a heavy, let's say, civil issue that's about to rise up. And if you know your Warhammer Fantasy lore from the 8th edition, eventually the Countess of Nuln will come to rule all of this area because Fyldorf was sacked. And Visenberg, which would have been the natural next place as the capital of Visenland, eventually becomes her capital outside. But Fyldorf is sacked. Sudenland gets minced because of this, and eventually will be completely absorbed into Wizenland, with the Countess leading all of it from Nuln.
Yeah. So, this leads to a couple of really interesting moments of that. Tamurkhan, when he realizes he attacks the wrong place, loses his shit. Because he's expended a lot of his legion. Like Fyldorf put up a hell of a fight. Like it was not like a little town. Like it was a big city. And it put up a hell of a fight. But Tamurkhan is so infuriated that he has it razed to the ground. He commands the Chaos Force to quite literally just level the city. And they do. It's left a smoking, ash-ridden hellhole. So if you're having fun with the roleplay game, by the way, your characters, by the time you start the campaign, like Tamurkhan's invasion is coming up or has happened.
It's already happened. It's already happened if you use the official dating, but you can make it happen during your game with these.
So you can you can go by Fyldorf and see the ruins, or in probably the rebuilding efforts. But so they level the city, and Tamurkhan basically gets depressed. He just sits there because he's thrown his fair. Yeah, he threw his chance and he wasted it on a mistake. And while Tamurkhan's sitting there, his horde starts to get agitated, where the elements of it that are not purely dedicated to him, so like the demons, stay with him, and they turn the area around Tamurkhan into a pit, often known as the Black Pit, because Tamurkhan, which should be a location notated on a map, and I don't think it's
a mine.
Yeah, so if you go into the south of Wizenland near the ruins of Fyldorf, you would find the Black Pit as a Nurgle-infested hellhole where demons can spawn very easily. So Tamurkhan sits there, and many parts of his horde just kind of ignore him and start wandering off. The Beastmen go off to attack. The Chaos Dwarfs even start wandering off to attack nearby cities. Drazos is happy for Tamurkhan to take as much time as he wants, because he's just going to keep grabbing slaves and testing his war machines and stealing Empire war machines so he can see what the Empire's been up to for the last few thousand years. And so all this is happening. Kazakh the Befouled, Kask, actually dies during this part because he attacks Drazoth the Ashen. Kask leads his army against the Chaos Dwarfs because they're not following Tamurkhan's orders. They're doing their own thing and are essentially kind of abandoning him. So Kask leads the cavalry of Tamurkhan's horde against the Chaos Dwarfs and gets destroyed. And he dies, and so do all of the Rot Riders, or the Rot Knights. So the Chaos Dwarfs actually destroy a notable portion of Tamurkhan's horde during this, because there's just infighting, because Tamurkhan isn't controlling his horde. Yep. And meanwhile, news has gone north to the city of Nuln, where basically a writer shows up and details to them what exactly happened. And Elspeth von Draken, who we'll talk more about next week, and we'll talk more about Nuln next week, they're able to see it's not just rumors of a horde. They can see a city that was theirs and what the size of this horde did to it. And they go, oh, fuck. And they call in everything to prepare for the inevitable siege. And Tamurkhan sits there for a while until a mysterious assassin attacks him. And the really cool part of the book is we get a literal play-by-play of this assassin working his way to Tamurkhan trying to kill him, and showing how fucking terrifying Tamurkhan is, because Tamurkhan obliterates this dude, even though he is shown to be a really good assassin.
Mm-hmm.
Tamurkhan wins, and it also shows how insanely clever Tamurkhan is, because when Tamurkhan kills him, the assassin like literally falls apart and burns up magically, and Tamurkhan immediately realizes two things. The assassin was undead, he was not alive, and because of the way he had been enchanted, his soul, or what would work for a soul for him, was utterly destroyed when he died. So Tamurkhan can't figure out who sent him. Was it the Empire? Was it Sile the Faithless? Was it the Chaos Dwarfs? The book never tells you. It never reveals who actually sent the assassin. But this assassination attempt pisses off Tamurkhan enough that he moves. He gets back into motion. And the other key thing that shows up in this point in the story is ultimately what ruins Tamurkhan, which is that because he had sat for a while, and it's also taken him years to get to this point, his body is falling apart.
Yeah.
Tamurkhan normally changes body like several times a year, generally speaking. During the campaign into the Ogre Kingdoms, he waited a whole year before he took over the Tyrant's body. At this point, he had waited for years, and his body had degraded to such a point he could no longer talk. It mentions that Tamurkhan gives a speech to his horde about how the time has come to attack Nuln. Nobody understands what he says. Like, they get the gist of what he's saying because of how much he's yelling, but there's no transcript of his speech because literally no one can understand him because he's no longer capable of speech. Because Tamurkhan likes how strong this body is so much that he's unwilling to leave it for a mere human vessel.
And I think that's great because it also speaks to the hubris that he has. It's just a lovely piece of storytelling. But beyond that, to move back to the assassination, just so we add a little extra point. I'm hearing myself, by the way. So I think your mic is definitely doing something there. Oh, I don't anymore. So as I was saying, the assassin was not detailed. And I think that is a core component of the storytelling that the books were going to have. Because when you're a decent writer, you don't drop these things without any intention of answering them at a later point. This was clearly one of the setup points that were going to be used later in other books, suggesting that most likely one of his brothers tried to kill him. And I think that is a perfect outcome for this particular setup. That doesn't mean that in your version, you couldn't say, well, no, it's the Grey College. In my version, the Grey College sent in one of their knife men to try and take him out. Or it was someone else who sent them in and tried to take him out. Oh,
this is the assassin, by the way. Like, he's literally breaking, like, he's multiple places simultaneously and is burning with magic. Like, he's a very weird assassin.
His Zinchi brother is clearly in on this one. And you get the idea here because they've bothered to depict it. They've bothered to do a blow-by-blow retelling of this particular deed that quite clearly they were setting this up for the future so that when they moved in and brought in the next step of books, they could hark back to their first one and tie it all off with a lovely little Nurgle-shaped bow and say, look, they were all part of the same story. They were all working in the same realm. And sadly, we never got to see that come to pass. But for those of us who like creating our own versions of the lore or using the established lore inside our games, it provides a perfect opportunity to say, well, in my version, this person sent the assassin and they did it for this reason. But I think in this case, for the storytelling, it was quite clear they were setting up their future books here. And yeah, love it completely.
Yep. And just to show some other beautiful pieces of artwork as we come to the finale of the story, here's the Siege of Nuln for anyone that's never seen it. Where you have a great unclean one. Look at the size of that great unclean one compared to the city.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God.
Yeah, I remember seeing that double page spread for the first time. I was also relatively pleased with it because unlike many other depictions of Nuln, they if that one wasn't Nuln, they bothered to show the height because Nuln has a big, huge, it's the big Nuln one. I couldn't remember where it was in the book. They bothered to show the height of the city as well because Nuln is built around a big hill to the northern sort of eastern component of it.
Yeah, and another thing, just to show Tarmak, here's Faldorf, right?
Yeah,
Faldorf is right here where these rivers meet up. Tamurkhan fucked up. Nuln's behind it up here.
Yeah, up there.
So he was so close. He just didn't
And
realize
between
where
the
he
two of them
was.
as well, to make it even more annoying for the poor chap, is Visenberg too, which is the capital of Visenland. So, cut a long story short, he done screwed up. But just on the point of the assassination, I do think it's a perfect open story for those of you out there who are looking to build interesting stories into your games.
Yep. So the final image that I'm going to show off is this one, which is, I love these kind of images, which shows the battle line. So it shows Tamurkhan's horde coming up from the ruins of Faldorf. And then here you see the Empire. Interestingly, the Siege of Nuln doesn't actually take place in Nuln itself. It's fought on the other side of the river from Nuln. And basically, because the forces of Nuln, they see what happened to Faldorf, and they realize that, especially with the Chaos Dwarfs, they can't hold in the city. If they hold in the city, they're going to get obliterated. They need to go out and fight. And it's Elspeth von Draken who actually very heavily leans on this point, but we'll talk more about why all that is next week. So,
indeed. It's quite good for those of you who know your Nuln lore as well, because the direction that they come in, without them being fully aware of it, is directly into the militarized part of Nuln, which is the bottom right-hand quadrant of it, which is basically one enormous barracks for the state armies of Nuln and the various mercenary companies that they hire in. So it was pretty much the worst place that he could have arrived at to try and invade the city. He'd been far better on the other side of the River Aver, but he wasn't. Or alternatively, on the other side of the River Reich, but he wasn't. So he just slammed into the toughest place to take, and also they were prepared for him. So sadly, poor Tamurkhan's plan was sort of doomed. But as we discussed, we'll discuss that one next week, the whole takedown. Let's just say that Tamurkhan doesn't really survive this one. Do we want to discuss? Yeah, we should probably say how the poor chap dies. Yeah, because that's a super important part of this tale.
Yeah, we'll focus more on the specifics of the final battle itself next week, because it's more about the Empire's preparation for Tamurkhan.
It really is.
But what it ultimately boils down to is that, to give her full credit, Elspeth von Draken knows Tamurkhan's gimmick, and she uses it against him.
Yeah.
Where she talks to Theodor Bruckner, who is the judicial champion and personal hand of judgment of Countess Emanuel von Leibwitz herself, and he is a monster.
Big guy. Oh, I love that model. Made by Ted White.
We'll talk a lot about him next week.
Yeah.
But he ends up, over the course of the Empire strategy, I won't say like the full why of it yet, but he gets full on manipulated and tricked. And he ends up getting into a duel with Tamurkhan. Mm-hmm. And by this point, Tamurkhan, to put it into perspective, how much the story points out how badly he's degraded, he's no longer ogre shaped. He's literally melting, and he's more like a shambling mound.
Yeah.
And he's blind. The body is blind, so he's not able to use sight as well. He has to use other senses to fight. He can't talk. And he's significantly weaker and slower than he normally would be. He's not at the height of his power at all. He's very, very weak. And because of this, Bruckner is able to go toe-to-toe with him. Because if he had been at the height of his strength, like a year prior, Tamurkhan, to put it bluntly, would have bodied Bruckner.
I think so. Easily.
And so they have this big epic duel, but Bruckner is victorious. He cuts down the tyrant body and defeats Tamurkhan, but like we've seen 2 other times, it's a reoccurring story beat, which is very good writing. So we get this reoccurring story beat. Tamurkhan does what he always does. He eats his way out of the ogre's body, and he jumps at Bruckner. And Bruckner, just a man, like anybody else, falls for it, just like everybody else did. And Tamurkhan kills him and starts eating his way inside of him. But because of what we'll talk about next week, I'm not going to get too into it this week, something very unexpected happens, which is that there was a trap. And Bruckner blows up. He turns out he was a bomb all along. And something on his body, which we'll detail next week, explodes into pure death magic. Mm-hmm. Pure amethyst fire. So, like, imagine the concept, right, of like when fire burns so hot, it burns like blue or whatever. Now, imagine in Warhammer, basically a death wizard creating the concept of an explosion that is made of pure Shyish.
Mm-hmm.
And Tamurkhan, who is Nurgle, which is essentially the essence of life in many ways, he's not just killed, he's incinerated.
Yep.
Tamurkhan is reduced to literal ash, and thus falls, frankly, outside of some end times bullshit, one of Nurgle's greatest mortal champions to ever live.
Yep, agreed. The end for Tamurkhan, I thought, was beautiful. It showed that the good guys, for want of a better description, were using their brains. We also got to see the inhumanity of Elspeth von Draken, who we will be discussing later, made manifest as she effectively set up the whole trap, fully aware that ultimately what she needed to do was take out this entity. And the only way to be sure of doing that was through someone like Theodore Bruckner. And it was one hell of a tempting trap, and it paid off. And I loved that as an end for the character, loved it as an end for the very characterful Nurgle champion, because most of the champions for Nurgle before that weren't that characterful. They were nothing more than, we are a representation of disease. What does that mean? You know, we're icky. And that was pretty much it. Oh, we count diseases. Oh, no, we follow diseases. Oh, we make diseases. It was always the same shtick again and again and again. But Tamurkhan was something unique, something interesting, and it was that unique nature that was used to be his undoing. And that in and of itself was just beautiful, because it was a consistent piece of storytelling from beginning right through to the end. And I think, personally, one of the best the Empire is invaded plots that Games Workshop ever came around to actually doing.
Yep. So some other fun notes just about his end is that the book is so great that very uniquely, gives you a play-by-play of the final duel between Bruckner and Tamurkhan, but it also does this amazing thing of you get to read Tamurkhan's inner dialogue in his head right when he dies. So, like, Tamurkhan, as he's eating Bruckner's body, is going, yes, this is it. This is the last body I'll ever need. This is and he dies mid-sentence, which is great because he blows up. And the book also reveals that although you've been reading various reports in certain types of dialogue boxes by an Empire author, it's revealed at the end of the main story that the writer of the actual story is Sile the Faithless.
Sile. You made me say it. I always say Sale. God damn it.
But yeah, it turns out that, so he is he declares himself the chronicler of Tamurkhan. Tamurkhan. But yeah, and it actually, you know what? Okay, I'm just gonna kind of read this hilarious little note, because this isn't the case. I want to be very clear. This isn't the case. It's literally just me looking at a sentence in my part of my brain going, oh. But he literally says, so ended the saga of Tamurkhan, he who sought the throne of chaos, and what I of his chronicler, blinded by burning metal, abandoned and scorned by my people, I who had risen so high, who had been called faithless, was left a beggar upon the road in the realm of the lost and the desolate, condemned by the dark gods to my black penance, a stranger in a strange land, but far from helpless. And soon my story shall also be told. Which means that he was intended for a later book. But
yeah, damn sure he was.
I have to say, you could make Sale the Faithless the advisor.
I mean, you could, but it would undermine the light wizard nature.
I'm saying, anyone out there that wanted to play with it,
you could 100% could. Yeah, you 100% could. And you could even, for example, as a single way of reinterpreting this, you could make the Light Wizard example be around about 100 years earlier.
Oh, that's true. He could have been the Light Wizard.
100 years later, he became Sale the Faithless, and through the course of this entire campaign was obliterated and had to come up with a new version of himself to get out of the horror show that he has landed himself in the middle of the Empire. You 100% could make this the advisor, and you could easily build a tale that makes sense for it. Now, when I first read that, I was pretty convinced that their intent was to probably make him the champion of Tzeentch, and possibly he was working against him the entire way, and possibly the assassin was sent by him as well, and the whole thing was just one giant piece of unreliable narration that would lead to another attempt on the Empire from potentially within, using a very different way of doing a chaos incursion, which would be enemy within style. The Tzeentch attempt to take down the Empire from within. And I thought that might have been a really interesting way of doing a completely different campaign. I wasn't sure if that was going to be the case, but I could certainly see there was a setup for that if they wanted to do it. It would have, however, made the Empire the focus of an attack twice, and I would have personally preferred they didn't do that. But it would have been super fun regardless.
Yeah. Makes me really wish Alan was still alive. I would have loved to interview him about his series.
That would have been ace, wouldn't it? What was your plans?
Yeah. So we're going to get caught up on the last super chats, and then we're going to answer questions until we're kicked out. But yeah, so that is the saga of Tamurkhan, which is super fun. Just super fun.
Great.
Mind briefly mentioning Epidemius. Yeah. I would have liked to have talked about him during the stream, but
holy crap! Yeah, we didn't really, did we? We were too busy focusing on all the coolness of Tamurkhan.
Yeah, we'll probably have to touch on him another day. But I will very briefly give you just an essential summary of that Epidemius. So he is one of the 7 tally masters of Nurgle. So his job is that he's basically like a hardcore chronicler / mathematician / accountant. Accountant's probably the most accurate term.
That's better.
And his job is to quite literally record, detail, and count all of Nurgle's plagues and diseases in existence and their effects within the material plane. So the effects of the diseases are having, what they do to mortals, how long they live, what kind of like developments the disease has, how it adapts, how it adjusts, like really detailed information. And he's supposed to do it for all of it, which is quite literally impossible. It's literally an impossible job because Nurgle's whole point is life proliferating and mutating endlessly, cancerously. And because of that, he's a bit of a grump. He's keenly aware of the fact that his existence is kind of suffering. And that he exists to do a job that is literally impossible. And that being said, he is fully committed to doing it. But because of that, he realizes that he needs like full attention to even stand a chance. So when things interrupt him, he gets irate. You're laughing at that most recent super chat, aren't you? Is he supernumerate? Yes. Yes. Would be supernumerate. He would.
And he'd even know how to use the talent.
Yeah. One would hope.
For those of you who don't know, supernumerate's a talent in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And in my game, the Lorehammer game, Gerhardt, one of the characters in that game, famously uses it badly, wrong, incorrect, and just doesn't quite get it.
God damn it. I want a scene this would never make sense and it can never happen. I want a scene so bad that's like Han Solo from The Force Awakens, where like it's Epidemius and Gerhardt in a room, and Gerhardt's like, supernumerate, and Epidemius goes, that's not how supernumerate works.
Don't tell me the odds.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, so Epidemius, he's carried around by a bunch of Nurglings, and that's why he's got like the pen and the paper and the hourglass and everything, is that he's constantly tracking information and detailing information about diseases. Like the whole point of the hourglass is that he watches someone get infected and he flips the hourglass over and he's making notes in time, watching the disease progress through the person's body. So he's a horrific creature because he doesn't want you to die, and he shows up to battlefields because that's where the disease of Nurgle happen very rapidly and are happening all over the place. His goal is to, quite frankly, capture you alive, infect you, and make notes as you are suffering horribly.
Yeah, totally. Consider in many respects an anthropomorphization of the entire concept of the Plague Bearer, the lesser demons of Nurgle, who are constantly droning their count as they go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 5,422,124, as they're counting each and every individual potential infection, disease, parasite, everything else. And in many respects, they are fueling his knowledge and knowledge of those like him. So he's an extension of already existing lore and showing how that lore leads into, and effectively like a little pyramid, all these great lesser demons moving towards someone like Epidemius, who are attempting to put together all of Nurgle's greatest creations. Yeah.
And he is someone that represents how most of us feel about doing mathematics. But Necromancer Cobalt, it's kind of funny that almost everyone underestimates greenskins even in 40k. I think it's great, but I can understand those who think it's overdone. Yeah, I think fantasy, I think, does a better job of handling its greenskins generally than 40k does. Because I think 40k, as much as I do love their greenskins because they're quite fun, it's almost purely orcs, which I find much more boring than like the whole spread of greenskin culture. And B, they're so memeified to the point of ridiculousness.
Yeah, they're a bit daft, and the Gretchen really don't do anything except die. But in Warhammer, there's just such a greater depth of greenskins.
Yeah, like the whole, you know, the average. I say this not as like in hate, but as like a criticism of the writing, is that if you meet like a general orc fan in 40k, the main things they're going to know about it is like, oh, red makes it goes faster, and if they believe something works, it works. But like when you actually get into some of the deeper reading, it's a lot more complicated, nuanced than that. But that also, like, as a concept, that very heavily threatens the integrity of the setting. Of like, well, why don't the greenskins just believe they win everything? Shouldn't they do that because they, you know, make believe manifest itself? Whereas like fantasy also has that exact, because the greenskins are the same greenskins essentially in both settings, but fantasy handles them a lot better. Of like, there are greenskins who paint themselves with tattoos and believe it will protect them, and it does offer them a form of protection, but it's much more grounded and simple. It's not like they paint themselves wildly purple and that makes them literally invisible, which a lot of 40k fans believe that's how it works in 40k, but obviously it wouldn't, because if that's how it actually worked, then greenskins would all just paint themselves, orcs would just all throw themselves in purple and be an invisible army, which means they would just win, and they haven't. So clearly something's not working right there. Just to I'm gonna get off my soapbox now. Breakerino, seems like Tamurkhan isn't the greatest general, too arrogant. Hey, narrow mountain pass, we'll be fine.
I actually agree with this in that he is a figure of manifest destiny. He believes that he has a manifest destiny and nothing can stand between him and it. And when something does, it comes as a surprise, almost like this great fate that I have not only come to the conclusion is mine, but I have effectively been promised it is going to occur. I am going to ascend, and it doesn't come to pass at all. He's not just not a great general, he's bound by his own faith. He actually believes his own talk. And we get that made manifest when he takes Fyldorf. We actually see it. And how does he respond? Badly. Because everything that he believes in has not come to pass. And then when he realizes what he's done wrong, and he makes his next fumbled attempt to try and resolve it, and he goes through the same processes, he is channeled towards his own death. He is, I think I agree with you, not the best general. He is, however, an extraordinarily powerful entity who manages to, through the course of his campaign, start off in a very clever place. But by the end of it, he makes mistake after mistake. And you could argue that a lot of that is because he's got stuck in that body for so long. He's so convinced that that's the one that's going to lead him to greatness. You could argue other things too, because to begin with, he does a lot of clever things and he manages to hold together a very disparate band of different chaos worshippers. But by the end of it, it's just mess up after mess up after mess up. And a lot of that is because I think he believes he has a manifest destiny. And it's so close that he gets messy.
Yeah, Tamurkhan, I think he works super duper well if you ever read through the Tamurkhan book of in your head comparing him to Archaon as you're reading through the book and seeing how different they are. Of that, Tamurkhan is very much focused on his personal ascension to the extent that he does the thing that he really sucks at that's very interesting to read is he's not good at controlling his horde. He's really bad at it.
Yeah.
And because of that, a lot of parts of it constantly slip from his fingers. And it's because he doesn't want to deal with it. Like, he doesn't care. And he really wants to focus on his own personal glory, but he needs to be managing and controlling his champions very effectively. Whereas I think, like, what makes an Everchosen is that's their focus, is control of the horde. That's what makes the Everchosen so scary. It's not that they're individually more powerful than, say, the likes of Tamurkhan. It's that they can wield the horde like a weapon.
Mm-hmm. And he does screw up again and again. It's fascinating. He's not a perfect character, and that's something I actually like about him. He's flawed.
Oh yeah,
What
he's
he
great.
is enormously powerful. I mean, enormously powerful. If you just look at him stat on stat in comparison to many of the other characters, he's enormously powerful, and that is just brilliant because you get the character is flawed. The character makes mistakes, and by the end of it, his arrogance, his certainty, his hubris, ultimately gets in the way of his success. And I think that is perfect.
Amdra has a membership to the Library of Nagasaki. I feel like that's a reference to something, and unfortunately, I don't know what it is.
God
that
damn it, neither do I.
Right over my head.
I'm very upset I don't know that one. Apologies.
Hendrix, since Tamurkhan is such a unique expression of Nurgle, how much more varied do you think? Imagine the hordes of Nurgle and types of creatures and demons versus what's described in the battle game. Endless. Yeah. Literally endless.
This is chaos. The whole point is that, admittedly, this is going to be one gigantic plague-filled horde no matter what you do, and a lot of the mutation is going to be based around how Nurgle itself expresses, whether that's slimy tentacles, flies, and gobbly, horrible, bloated, flat, pustulous things. Regardless, it's still going to be endlessly various, and that's something that the miniatures and also, when you move over to Total War, literally can't do, because they have to mass produce these, or alternatively for the computer game, produce them cheaply in a very short order. And we're talking here months rather than decades.
Physical medium or visual medium will never compare to imagination. It just can't.
Yeah, quite. So loosely speaking, endless variety.
Yeah. I mean, just think about all the different ways in our world, how vague the term disease can be, and like how different diseases manifest. As many different symptoms as you can have from a disease is all the different ways you can have Nurgle, which is literally endless. CB4, I just want to say less than half of us have liked the stream. Please support Andy and Sotek and hit that like button. Well, thank you. We appreciate that.
Thank you, CB4M, for reminding everyone to be awesome.
Hutchins, I've heard Nurgle worshippers described as people who have sunk so far into despair, each and every one is a soul that has given up on life. What do you both think? So I would say as a broad stroke, it can apply very heavily, but it's not a like, this is how they all are case.
Yeah, definitely. I don't like using absolutes outside of, for example, demons, which in many respects are manifest versions of absolutes. But when it comes to mortality, which they are as varied as people are varied. They all have their own reasons. Now, chaos, depending on which version you use of it, ultimately erodes at whatever personality you might have had and twists it towards whatever that particular god's end goals are. But that's time as well. There are going to be as many people in there who are filled with a bizarre hope because they basically appeal to, for example, Nurgle because they were dying of a disease. They somehow survived. That's not despair. They've not given in to despair. It's the opposite. They have reached out to the worst option to try and just hold on to life for that one extra step. Now, it may eventually lead to despair, but it didn't start with despair. Nurgle is not just despair. Nurgle is a far broader deity. But despair is a great starting point in the same way that excess is a great starting point for Slaanesh, in the same way that change is a great starting point for Tzeentch. So in this particular instance, I'd say that the quotation is, much as Sotek suggests, a great starting point, but I definitely would not apply it universally.
I think the best way to actually tackle this is it comes from a series of quotes from writers where a lot of people will hear the concept of Nurgle is despair, Tzeentch is hope, Slaanesh is excess, and
I really hate hope. Don't throw that one at me.
Yeah. So what I would say to the people that see that and they go, okay, I've seen that written all over the place, but when I'm looking at the characters, like I see it like it doesn't make sense or there's crossover and stuff. I think the better way to look at that is think of that as more like the nugget where maybe those entities began. Like that was them at their basic, most fundamental foundation. And then in the thousands, if not millions of years since, they blossomed into these far more complicated concepts that cover many different things. Maybe that was the seed. Maybe that was the seed where they began, but they will always grow far beyond that. Because the gods have so much crossover that if you try and be like, oh, well, if you feel any kind of rage or anger, well, that's Khorne. Well, Nurgle followers get angry all the fucking time because of like people like burning their plague gardens or not accepting despair or not accepting grandfather Nurgle into their hearts, yada yada. Does that mean they're Khornate? No, that's a Nurgle expression. But don't get too wound up into simplified concepts that you also have to remember that a lot of those quotes are kind of designed for people that have never seen the setting before, and you're trying to give them it's a very base, here's your starting point, but as you learn, it's going to get more complex. Hammond, I suppose you will bring with... Oh, okay, I already did that one. Haha, great. And then a couple came in.
That one.
Gretchen do plenty when shot out of a shotgun. Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, there you
go. Joseph, not sure if this has been asked, but what is Forge World? What did they do? To put it
really simply,
short version.
Super short one. Are you ready? Games Workshop has the studio that make all of the games. Forge World was a small side part of Games Workshop that made big, interesting, different models. To begin with, it made things like busts. So a little bust of a Space Marine, or maybe a 3 or 4 inch tall Space Wolf Scout, or some equivalent. So you could paint it up differently. Over the course of time, Forge World started releasing different content. It started releasing its own books to support its own models, so you could actually use models that it created in your games. Over the course of time, it got bigger and bigger and bigger, until eventually Forge World was releasing its own games, like, for example, the Old World for Warhammer.
There you go. Peter MV1, any ideas how his demon form could have been like? I had the idea of him evolving into a big demon moth. Something like that would have been really cool.
Interesting. I hate moths, so I think that would be a good idea.
But
I actually hate them.
Yeah, I think that would work very well, of the idea of the maggot kind of like cocooning and then turning into some kind of horrible insectoid to keep his insectoid thing going, but to evolve into something more...
I'm imagining big, long, hanging limbs and big, heavy, dust-filled wings that are disgusting, dropping disease wherever it goes by. And a big, long proboscis. A big long proboscis that it can stick into people and fill them with maggots that can turn into some sort of horrible extra new version of him. Oh yeah, you can make it a gigantic horrible thing. Love it.
Delicious. Quick, just starting the stream. Time to grace Grandfather Nurgle and not move for the next 3 hours. Have any lizardmen fallen to Nurgle or Chaos? Depends on what you mean by fallen, in the sense of like, have they been emotionally corrupted into a worshiper of Chaos? No. Are there lizardmen that not that we're aware of? I'll put it that way. Are there lizardmen that have been heavily, horribly mutated on the battlefield and like turned into like things that die very quickly? Yeah, that happens.
Yeah, totally. I would say, if you're looking at the overall world and what could and couldn't happen, I would argue loosely that the Slann could not corrupt, that lizardmen could, but it'd be extraordinarily difficult, particularly given just how focused some of them are on a very different style. But I would also argue that post the arrival of Tehenowyn, that the chance of corrupting a lizardman have increased, not decreased.
Yeah, the lizardmen, at the end of the day, think of it as like the Chaos entities tend to rely very heavily on like manipulating souls/emotions to get people. And the lizardmen have a very bizarre, alien, cold-blooded set of those qualifications that make them relatively resistant to chaos. Kind of like if you're looking out in nature, like you have certain creatures that, because their body temperature runs surprisingly low, like certain diseases just really can't get a hold on them. Doesn't mean they're immune to everything and that they can't get sick.
Be carriers.
And can't be carriers as well, yeah. But it's not going to present in them like you would expect.
Yep, agreed.
Sam Alden, what do you guys think is the Throne of Chaos? I doubt it's a physical throne. I'll put it that way.
So if you're looking at building the story that they were clearly building, it would either be a thing, it would be potentially a concept that they were all wrong about and none of them would ever ascend. That would be an obvious choice. Or it would be something that would ultimately kill them in any attempt to try and ascend upon it. But I do think that there was some traction in the previous suggestion from much earlier in the stream that it would be tied through to Be'lakor, because tying through all of this through to Be'lakor at the end, because of the importance that Be'lakor has for the ascension of pretty much anything to influence the world, I think you've got a really nice story that you could build into that.
Yeah, actually, since you mentioned that, so by the time of Tamurkhan's point in the story, which I think is very key, Archon has not become Everchosen yet.
Correct.
So the idea that this is Be'lakor trying to potentially manipulate into someone that he could hopefully possess to make himself into what he's always trying to do, would have been a very good 8th edition timeline story for Be'lakor, because he always does that, and he doesn't really get a chance to do that in the regular story, because he tries to possess Archaon, but that's a little before where we are in the storyline, and it didn't go well. So I think
there's definitely something in that. Doesn't necessarily mean that should be it, but in your own version, if you want to run with it, I would.
Lenore, I would say 40K recently deals with it much better in recent times with the Mike Brook orc books. He even has a sort of philosophical talk between an orc and a Drukhari, and it works and explores how orcs become smarter when they get bigger. Yeah, sure. There you go. Godzilla, I can't remember his
focus on the orcs.
Yeah.
Purely.
It's like, I don't know. We've got
different flavors.
Yeah. It's like I just like my Scar Snakes and my Groms. Godzilla 2021. I can't remember his quote fully from the game, but one of the lines he says is, "I cannot be killed by a mortal man. Nurgle or fate said so." That's a lot of faith just because it was prophesized he wouldn't. Yeah,
it is.
To be fair, he is correct. He is not killed by a mortal nor a man, depending on how you define those terms.
Yep, agreed.
He kind of gets witch kinged in that sense. Still loading. Missed last week. What's the worst nightly order?
Oh, well, no, it's still loading underneath. Said I'll wait for Elspeth stream next week for the answer.
Yeah. Though that being said, there, just as a random aside, there is a hilarious nightly order whose whole gimmick is they have really shitty luck.
Yeah, the Night of the Everlasting Light.
The
Everlasting Light. They're sworn to Verena, and they are known for their extraordinary bad luck.
They die a lot. All right, so that brings us pretty much to the end of the stream. I am keenly aware of the fact that we did not answer any of the questions from the question thread. I apologize for that. So I am going to go in there afterwards and try and answer as many questions as I can. I'll see if I can bribe Andy to maybe take a peek in there and answer some of them.
I might drop by.
If you would feel so inclined, so that y'all aren't just left hanging in the wind. But we hope you all enjoyed the show, and this was super duper fun.
Yeah, it was super fun.
Yeah,
I got to sit back and enjoy most of that one, so I particularly enjoyed it.
Yeah, I know. Hopefully Nurgle fans will forgive us. I know we spent an hour just kind of discussing like the background of the Tamurkhan book series, but I do think it was really important to go over.
I do as well, because if we hadn't done it in this one, we almost certainly wouldn't have done it in the next one, which means it wouldn't have happened. And I think that discussing Tamurkhan and how it came about, and also the promise that it offered, was well worth it, not just because we like it and we want to actually say, hey, this book rocks and we wish we got more, but because for those of you out there who want to know how these books came about, how the background for the game that you might be playing right now, if you're playing Total War, where did it all come from? I think it's really nice for us to dive into that, not just the lore parts, but the actual, how did these books come about? Because in this particular case, it had a fascinating story in and of itself.
Yeah, but as recompense, I promise that we'll do Nurgle again before we do Empire or Dwarfs again. So I don't know exactly when that'll be, but I promise we'll do Nurgle before the other two.
We'll see how that goes, huh?
Yeah. I've been hankering for a Kugath Plaguefather stream at some point anyway.
Kugath would be pretty freaking cool.
Yeah.
I like
we hope you all enjoyed. This was super duper fun. We will be doing something this Wednesday. I'm not 100% sure yet. A part of me really wants to do kind of a Throne of Chaos discussion stream, because I think that could be a lot of fun and would be
that could be a whole hell of a lot.
So we're probably going to do that, because then we could talk a lot about like some further concepts leaning on the first hour of what we did the stream. So it would be appropriate.
So make sure that that's over on Loremaster of Sotek's channel. Don't get confused. That's on Wednesday / Thursday, depending on where you are in the world. If you're here in the UK, it's Thursday at midnight.
Yeah.
The witching hour stream.
Yeah, to create some Chaos Champions. So we'll do that. And then make sure you join us this upcoming Sunday for the Elspeth on Dragon and Nolan stream, and the last part of the Throne of Chaos trilogy on Andy's channel. So that'll be on the Warhammer channel, so make sure that you're subscribed there so you don't miss that. And that
was a super cool one.
That was gonna be super cool.
Yeah, super cool. I really like Elspeth, and I particularly like her in a way that I think apparently Sotek didn't to begin with. So I'm super interested to see if we can dive into that a bit.
Yeah, I will definitely do my little lecture about why I initially hated her. I no longer do, but there was a long time I did not like her. So anyway,
I think just to prepare you all for that one, I think the very reasons that he hated her are the reasons I liked her as well. So I think that's going to be super
Oh, that'll be
fascinating
spicy.
to see if I'm right. Because if that is right, I think it will just speak to the Warhammer game as a whole and what it offered in two very different ways. So I'm quite looking forward to that.
Yeah, that will be good.
Don't miss it. That's next Sunday at 4 p.m. UK time, or alternatively, it's 10 a.m. your time, is it not?
Yeah.
10 a.m. You poor people.
Yep. Good old Lorehammer stream. So, yep. And that's it. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
See y'all next time. Bye-bye.